When Gwen Mitchell-Hill was found lying in a pool of blood just steps away from the safety of her front door, her neighbours immediately called for an ambulance. But Gwen's shocking injuries quickly raised suspicion.
Something wasn't right. An elderly lady doesn't just trip over the doormat and cause that sort of damage. It just doesn't happen.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Her bag was nearby, and we asked her friend to check whether she'd been robbed or not, and we discovered the purse was missing.
When I received the phone call to go down to Mossman, the nature of the job was uncertain. It was an incident involving an old lady. Whether she'd fallen, whether she'd been attacked, we were unsure at the time. Unfortunately for us, there was no crime scene. One of the residents, in good faith, thought they were doing the right thing and actually hosed away most of the blood and any other evidence that could have been there or might have been there. There was a few blood stains, a bit of paper with blood on it, and basically that was about it. We took some blood samples to make sure that they were hers, to make sure that there were no other blood samples there if there was an offender.
What I was told was that this lady had been found, that her walking stick was close to the body, that she had severe head injuries, and that some money had been stolen.
The 82-year-old was rushed to hospital, but died soon after. She never regained consciousness to tell the police what really happened.
I was concerned. In my view, this was not typical of a fall. It really suggested to me that this could very well be a homicide. What happens with people, if they're conscious while falling over backwards, you always, as a natural instinct, turn round as you fall. What was very worrying about this case was that the injury was in the midline. And those injuries, in my view, were caused by a blow or two blows to the back of the head. There was just nothing obvious that had caused these injuries except for a blunt object with some weight behind it, imparted with some considerable force.
From an investigative point of view, the two options we had was that it was a related killing or a stranger killing. After days of investigation, we were starting to form the view that this was a stranger killing. And so we're looking for someone who is not connected or related to the victim, a very difficult task.
Police canvassed the area looking for witnesses to the robbery. But despite the time of day and public location, no one saw anything suspicious.
The chances of the killer being sighted were very high, and he was very lucky not to be sighted.
For 2 months, investigators struggled to find leads. Then another attack, less than 1 kilometre from where Gwen Mitchell-Hill was murdered. The victim this time was an elderly man.
The victim of this assault had a description of the attacker. We decided to release that with the endeavour of trying to locate who it was and the community to help.
But just as it was made public, there was more bad news.
Police tonight are warning that a deranged killer is on the loose. He's now killed twice and may strike again.
Lady Winifreda Ashton played a game of bingo here at her local club yesterday afternoon. She went to her bank. Within half an hour, she was dead. She'd been bashed in the bin room of her block of units and strangled with her pantyhose. Her attacker escaped with a small amount of money. Today, her neighbours were shocked and living in fear.
Well, was it Lady Ashton? Yes.
The significance of this particular murder was if they were linked, we now had a major problem.
When an elderly woman was found bleeding outside a block of units, she died before she could tell anyone what had happened. But her injuries and her missing purse convinced police she was the victim of a vicious robbery. 2 months later, Lady Winifreda Ashton, the widow of famous painter Sir William Ashton, was savagely beaten and strangled after being robbed of just a few dollars.
We walked down a driveway, and inside the foyer area was an area where the bins were stored, and inside that room was a deceased person lying on the ground. She had her raincoat, a red raincoat, slightly pulled up over her neck, and there were some unusual elements in that her shoes were located a short distance away, so was her walking stick, and at the top of her head were a pair of stockings. There was a gas bill and a purse. Later that night, when we did examine the deceased very closely, we noticed that there was a small piece of stocking embedded into her neck.
There was no doubt about it. This was a homicide, and the reason why it was a homicide was that it was a ligature strangulation, and it can only be a homicide, really.
This is not the first time the killer has hit this area. 2 months ago, another elderly woman was murdered in an almost identical crime.
At these flats, just a couple of blocks away from Lady Ashton's unit, Gwendolyn Mitchell Hill was bashed and left to die in her foyer. Again, all for a few dollars. The police say the similarities are chilling.
There was evidence to suggest, with quite confidence, that these crimes were linked. The environment, the time of day. Both ladies were over 80 years of age. Both ladies had money taken out of their purse. Both ladies were brutally assaulted, and only about 1 kilometre apart.
While the first crime scene was cleaned up and all of the evidence washed away, this scene remained intact and undisturbed. Forensic investigators were able to find what they hoped would be their first clue.
She was wearing gloves, and we found a number of grey hairs. There were 2 possibilities. One was that she's placed her hands above her head in an effort to ward off the attack, and that the exchange of hairs to the gloves is simply from her own head, or that during the attack she may have grabbed some hairs from the attacker. So we refer them off to the forensic laboratory, and they're looking at peculiarities, colour obviously, thickness, those sorts of things. Unfortunately, the hairs in this case, being grey, weren't particularly distinctive. They're fairly similar from person to person. DNA testing was very, very new, and you generally needed large quantities of blood or human tissue to actually carry out DNA analyses.
What was clear at this second murder site was that if the killer was the one and the same, his aggression towards the victim had intensified.
In our first murder, we had a degree of greed in terms of stealing from the purse. What was a little bit different in this one was that the lower half of her body was bare due to the fact that the pantyhose had been removed, and the pantyhose had been used as a weapon. So in this particular case, we were now thinking that it was not only greed and violence that was motivating the killer, but there was a degree of a sexual motivation that could be associated with it.
It wasn't the crime of someone who was committing a robbery. It was a crime of someone who had a particular interest in committing extraordinary violence, taking risks, and with some bizarre sexual tastes and probably bizarre sexual fantasies. Crimes of this nature are typically committed by people who are young. Now, consistent with that was the extraordinary violence and energy shown, which is that of a younger person. And it seemed male rather than female, because mostly females don't engage in violence of that level. Most people who commit crimes do it at their convenience, which is they do it fairly near home. They feel comfortable in the area, they sort of know the streets, they can look out for where people are, and also it means they can plan escape routes if they want to.
What we're looking at is someone who round about 4 o'clock in the afternoon is available time-wise to commit a crime, and that narrows the field down somewhat. One of the categories was that it could be a student who gets out of school at 3 p.m. and has a desire to steal money. A couple of the high schools we looked at, there was over 1,000 students attending. And of course at that point in time we didn't know the sex of the killer, although the profile seemed to think that it was a young male. The possibility was it could have been a female.
The only suspect detectives had at this point of the investigation, and who might fit the profile, was the young man who had attacked the elderly gentleman.
Today, the police released this composite picture of a suspect. He's 22 to 25 years old and about 180 centimetres tall.
I feel I've seen him a few times. Because of the hair, it was unusual. I'm a hairdresser and I notice hair.
Police want him because just a few weeks ago he bashed an old man who lives just down the road from Lady Ashton. That's about the only clue the police have got to go on, but they pretty well believe the killer is a local who may well strike again.
One of the aspects of a serial killer is that there is an emotional time break between killings. And in this particular case, there was about 9 weeks between the two. So there's a cooling off period when someone's operating as a serial killer. Therefore, our decision-making process was if we had a serial killer on our hands that had committed 2 murders, we expected a third.
The murders of 2 elderly women in the Sydney suburb of Mossman had police convinced they were dealing with a serial killer. Then, a report came through of another attack.
Doris Cox is a resident of the Garrison Retirement Centre off Spit Road in Mossman. On Wednesday at about 4 in the afternoon, she was walking down one of the narrow pathways inside the grounds when she was attacked.
She had severe injuries to her head and to her face. The original thought by the other residents that found her was that she'd fallen over.
The crime scene again was washed down by staff at the retirement village. There were some dilute blood stains and that was all that was left for further examination.
Mrs. Cox is now in a satisfactory condition at Mossman District Hospital.
Doris. Here was someone who perhaps could tell us who the killer was or a description of the killer. But unfortunately, she was a chronic dementia and she had no recollection of the assault or who committed the crime. And these things happen. I mean, this was one of those days. So we basically picked up the pieces and off we go. A canvass was conducted immediately of the area and we did discover a couple of witnesses that didn't actually see the crime, but what they did see was a person in the vicinity at the time. A young male who was riding a skateboard. And where this person was riding the skateboard was down the footpath, only a couple of metres from where the crime occurred. And it was at that time, it was round about 4 o'clock. So he became a person of interest, a real person of interest.
Sydney detectives want to question a young skateboarder over the brutal assault on a woman in Mossman 3 days ago. The youth was seen in the area at the time of the attack, and police believe the sighting could be linked to the murders of 2 other elderly Mossman women earlier this year.
Bearing in mind with the viciousness of these assaults, and we could not determine what was causing the wounds on the skull or on the head of these ladies, it was then thought that, well, perhaps the weapon's the skateboard.
Unfortunately, the skateboard and its rider disappeared without trace, and another lead evaporated. Painstakingly, detectives followed up every piece of information they received from the public, but the killer remained a step ahead.
We've gone from March through to May and now through to October, and we're now in early November. It was a Thursday afternoon and there was a phone call, and the phone call was simply that there's another one at Lane Cove.
With a sprightliness that belied her 85 years, Madge Pard met a violent death as she walked home from the Lane Cove shops. It's believed a killer stalked the elderly widow before hitting her repeatedly over the head with a blunt object. She was left dying in the alley behind her block of units.
You could have dropped a pin in the office because of the silence that went round the office. Not another one was the comment, not another one.
I just can't believe it. Because, you know, we saw a lot of each other.
A friend of Mrs. Pard's was among the first on the scene.
Well, I thought she'd had a heart attack and rushed to the big house to ask Gracie to ring for the ambulance.
Mrs. Pard dropped her 2 shopping bags the moment the attack began. When she was found, she was still wearing her wedding ring, but 3 small money purses were missing.
There was similarity with the victim, there was similarity with the crime scene, there was a similarity with the method. Same time of day, she'd been shopping. Everything was similar to what we had. So we now had 3 murders and 1 attempted murder.
And just like the similarities in the murders, this crime scene had been cleaned up before the forensic team arrived.
There's a lot of frustration because we were potentially losing evidence again. We could have found evidence that could have indicated things such as the number of times the person was hit. There might have been some shoe print evidence at that particular scene, and being washed down, again, you lose that potential to recover that sort of evidence. A very extensive examination of the crime scene was made, and a number of items were located. This included a pipe, some barbells and a fence post, which may have been used as a murder weapon.
Even though these injuries were severe, what wasn't present was massive skull fracture. So what that would imply is that, relatively speaking, the object isn't very heavy. It would probably rule out concentrated weights like barbell weights. I don't think that these injuries were caused by a fence post. There was really nothing in these injuries to indicate that it was one weapon above any other.
With strong similarities to attacks on elderly women in Mossman, police today renewed their manhunt. Teams of detectives spent the day canvassing surrounding streets. Gripped by fear, elderly people on the lower North Shore now are varying their daily routines.
No, well, I'm scared to come up here and get back safe. I don't mind telling you. I am. I wouldn't walk.
So we worked that night. In fact, we worked right through the night, right through Thursday night into Friday morning. And I told the team that early Friday afternoon I was going to head home for the weekend and hopefully have a day off and come back fresh. And I actually got within probably 200 or 300 metres of my home when I got an urgent call that they'd found another body.
Good evening and welcome to News World. And sadly, for the second time in 24 hours, the unthinkable has happened. Another old lady has been murdered, battered to death on her own doorstep in broad daylight. Sydney has a monster on the loose who singles out the most defenceless. Now 4 elderly women are dead and 1 is still suffering.
The latest killing happened here at the Wesley Gardens Retirement Centre at Belrose in Sydney's northern suburbs. At first, nursing staff thought the victim had died after a heavy fall.
It was quite obvious when we arrived and had a look at this latest victim. She'd been strangled with her own pantyhose, and her purse that was near the body had been interfered with, and it looked like some money had been stolen.
And here again tonight, well-meaning people who never dreamt a murder took place may have accidentally interfered with a crime scene. As happened at Lane Cove last night, the area was washed away before the police arrived.
I did ask them what they thought of the stockings that were tied around the neck of the deceased person, and they indicated that they thought perhaps she was trying to keep her neck warm as a scarf.
We believe there are similarities in relation to the other murders we are investigating on the North Shore. And there was absolute fear before they were frightened at Mossman, but it was contained, we believe, or we thought, at Mossman. But now people were frightened on the whole North Shore. Where next?
4 elderly women, all over the age of 80, were dead. All had been bashed and robbed, all murdered around 4 p.m. There was no doubt police had a serial killer on their hands, and the time span between his killings had now lessened to 24 hours.
When things are proceeding like this, you can be fairly sure that they're going to reach some sort of a climax, which is likely to be more florid crimes, or he decides that he's had enough and makes an admission and calls up the police.
The murder of Olive Cleveland sent the media into a frenzy. Newspapers were calling the murderer the Granny Killer, and the pressure on police to find him was extreme.
Police have intensified the manhunt. Additional detectives assigned to the case spilling over into makeshift offices in a garage at Mossman Police Station.
We went from a group of 15 or 20 investigators investigating a couple of murders. We then went to a group of 35 investigators, and we ended up with a group of 70.
Sydney police have stepped up security measures for elderly people with a series of self-protection seminars.
The large turnout for the first of the seminars is a strong indication of the fear among the elderly that the killer will strike again.
Well, that last lady that was It was so close to home. It was very close to us, and we are, well, we're not totally altogether frightened, but I mean, we are, well, we'd like some security.
What was concerning the task force was that the latest killing had occurred outside the geographical area of the first three.
There has to be a link between the murder scenes, and the question that we all asked ourselves was, what is the link? And that's what an investigator's got to look at, and that's what we looked at. One of the characteristics of a serial killer is that they work in an area where they've got control or knowledge, or it's a comfort zone. So we believed the killer had some intimate knowledge of the area of Mossman, intimate knowledge of the area of Lane Cove, and intimate knowledge of this retirement village at Belrose. There was a common denominator geographically with these locations. Find the geographical link and you'll find the killer.
But less than 2 weeks later, there was another murder. The granny killer had returned to a street not far from his first victim.
A widow who lived alone, Muriel Faulkner, had recently suffered a stroke. Sometime after 4:30 on Thursday afternoon, she became the North Shore Killer's fifth victim. Mrs. Faulkner was strangled and bashed, her body found in the blood-stained hallway by a visiting neighbour.
The injuries here were severe head injuries caused by a blunt object again, as well as strangulation, and then what appeared to be a displaying of the body after death. This was an addition to the previous cases, and again indicated to us that there was a progression in terms of severity.
It's usual for people who are committing a series of offences to become more confident as time goes on, or to do things in a more deliberate fashion because they've had a bit more practice. That's fairly classic among the development of offences of this nature. He had plenty of time with Mrs. Faulkner because he somehow succeeded in getting into the house. Once into the house, it would have been easy to subdue her, and once she was killed, he had plenty of time to arrange the body, do whatever bizarre things pleased him and made him feel good, and then depart.
The amazing and outstanding factor about this crime scene was that it was the first pristine crime scene that we had. It was a crime scene inside a dwelling.
And one of the things we noticed was that there were some shoe prints in blood. We immediately thought that these could well in fact be those of the attacker.
But there was a problem. The shoe prints weren't very clear.
We subjected the carpet to a number of chemical treatments and light treatments, and we did this in a particular sequence, and we found that with a particular treatment we were able to actually recover a lot more detail that wasn't initially visible to the naked eye. We could see sufficient detail to determine that this was some sort of business shoe or some sort of perhaps military shoe.
Even though a lot of young people have large shoes, it was a type of shoe that is worn by not so much a juvenile but a more mature adult male person. We're now starting to move towards it being an older person rather than a younger person.
One of the issues that came up was the very neat arrangement of things. I think the stick was put in a particular place and the victim's shoes were arranged in a particular way. And people who are taught neatness and who learn to live a life of neatness have often spent a lot of time in the military.
Troops are today pounding the beat on Sydney's North Shore to protect the elderly from the serial killer.
Hello, ma'am. How are you? Good afternoon.
Now believing the granny killer was an older man, investigators decided to re-interview previous witnesses, hoping to prompt fresh memories.
I was asked to go and speak to the neighbour of Muriel Faulkner down at Mossman. She opened up a little bit more than what she did initially to the police and told me that she saw a grey-haired man, quite portly, and he looked like a doctor. And on our way back to the office, I said, how perfect would this be? A portly old man with grey hair in his 60s running around committing murders in Mossman, and who would suspect him?
It was first thought the granny killer was a young man, but now police had a shoe print and a sighting at the last crime scene that suggested someone older. And there were also those indistinguishable grey hairs on the gloves of the second victim.
I said, how perfect would this be? A portly old man with grey hair in his 60s running around committing murders in Mossman, and who would suspect him?
Detective Tuxford now went looking for reports of the grey-haired man at the crime scenes, and the result was chilling.
We went back to the Lane Cove area. I did locate a number of people who in fact saw a middle-aged man with grey hair.
G'day, love. Let me carry one of those for you.
Oh, thank you.
The grey-haired man assisted this neighbour of Mrs. Payard's to her unit, and this neighbour thought what a lovely man this man was to assist her with the groceries.
So again, a grey-haired man had been placed at the crime scene. But was this man a good Samaritan, or indeed the killer? Then a report of an assault a month before the first murder and near to that crime scene gave detectives a lead.
She was visiting from Queensland, and she had been shopping for the day and was walking home to where she was staying. The assailant bashed her over the head and took her handbag and money.
Luckily for the detectives, the victim had taken good notice of her assailant as he walked by. No longer was he just the grey-haired man.
Detectives get this gut feeling. I had that gut feeling, and I knew that was our man.
But they had no name for him, and it was now 3 months since the last murder.
I was on an afternoon shift and I got a call to attend the Greenwich Hospital where a woman had said that she'd been assaulted, indecently assaulted by a man. And I got a description of one man who was known as the Pie Man, who had made a delivery about the time that the elderly woman had said she'd been assaulted. The inquiries I made with the hospital staff gave me the name of the pie company, and they gave me the name of the man who had the contract to deliver pies to Greenwich Hospital, and his name was John Wayne Glover.
The detective contacted Glover and arranged to speak to him the next day. But it was an appointment Glover would never keep.
When he hadn't showed up by 6 p.m, I phoned his home again, wondering why he hadn't shown up. His wife answered the phone and explained that right at that moment she was leaving for the hospital because he just attempted to commit suicide. He'd left a suicide note, and I remember very much the words "no more grannies" on it. It was a significant thing for me to do as a junior detective, to go in and talk to him by myself and get a photograph, knowing that if I didn't get it, all was lost.
This was a tremendous breakthrough for the task force, because we now had, not only did we have the sketch drawing of the 50-year-old male grey-haired suspect who had committed a lot of assaults, we now had a Polaroid photograph of another suspect who had come to light just recently. Our feeling was that we were on the way. We were on the way.
As John Glover was placed under surveillance, his background was being checked. And not surprisingly, apart from his age, it matched the forensic profile perfectly, starting with a criminal record in his 20s.
There was one there where there was some assault on a woman. There was one there of offence of peep and pry. He had in fact had some period of time in the army, in another country. We found out that he was a company representative and he had a company car. We found out that he normally worked of a morning and he was normally finished by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So he has the availability of time. The other thing we learned about him was that he was linked to the crime scenes by employment.
As a pie salesman, John Glover's job took him to Belrose, Lane Cove, and back to his home in Mossman.
It doesn't prima facie mean that he's the killer at that point of time, but it certainly gives us that sense of encouragement and direction.
The pieces of the puzzle were falling together, but the detectives needed more before they could make an arrest.
What we wanted was evidence, and what we're going to do was allow him to select a victim, if he did. We would then obtain evidence of him stalking the victim, of being a predator, and we would allow him to get within probably metres of a victim, and then we would prevent the crime. There were times when he would stop his vehicle and get out of the car and go for a walk, and that became something of interest as to what he was up to. But then he wouldn't do anything. He'd simply get back in his car and off he'd go again.
But the detectives didn't give up on Glover or the investigation. They were now targeting nursing homes and unreported sexual assaults, wondering if Glover, the pie salesman, might have dropped by.
The secretary was actually looking quite knowledgeable, and she said, well, yeah, we're talking about 4 and 20 pies. And as soon as she said that, I felt really quite good about it, because yes, it was 4 and 20 pies that this man was, John Glover, was representing. And she then said, would you be looking for John Glover? I thought, oh, this is just amazing. Like, she, not only does she know about, she actually knows his name, so that's a really positive identification. I said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, we are looking at someone called John Glover. And then she just looked me square in the eye and said, that's my husband. And I was just incredulous. I said, will you tell John that I'm here today? She said, oh, no, I won't, because he was so upset last time he tried to commit suicide. And I said, oh, okay, that's fine. We all knew straight away the impact that this was going to have on our investigation. The risk was that he would speak to his solicitor and confront the police and say, put up or shut up. Or he would go undercover, or him being such a wild character, who's to say he wouldn't have gone off and attacked another woman.
John Wayne Glover was the prime suspect for the murder of 5 women. He was under his 5th week of surveillance when a detective visited a local nursing home.
I went into my spiel, which was along the lines that I'm making a number of inquiries in relation to sexual assaults on the northern suburbs, and I was wondering if they'd had anyone approach them that was offering to sell meat pies to distribute through their kitchens.
Without realising, the woman she was speaking to was Glover's wife.
It's probably 1 in a million chance that this would happen, but it happened. And you have to deal with it. I mean, it's one of those things, you can't run away from it, you have to deal with it. The following Monday morning, surveillance are still carrying out their normal surveillance duties that have been going on for several weeks. And John Glover actually leaves home at the normal time. He gets into the company car and he heads off.
He rang his employer and said, I'm not coming into work today, I'm going to see my solicitor. So we thought, that's it, game's up. He went to a bottle shop and bought a bottle of whiskey, which we all thought was very odd, but still. He had a case with him, and we thought, well, that's to go and see his solicitor with.
He went to an address at Mossman, parked his car out the front, got out of the car, had his briefcase, walked inside premises, knocked on the front door, the door was open, he was welcomed, he went inside. The surveillance police were sitting down the road, they saw this, they were quite happy that it seemed to be a legitimate visit.
But the hours ticked by, and John Glover didn't come out. By late afternoon, the police were beginning to worry.
Fortunately, there was a dog that was barking, quite loud, near the premises. And so we decided to send the local uniformed patrol in to check out this complaint about this dog barking. They went to the premises and they knocked on the front door and there was no answer. And the place seemed to be in darkness. So they became quite concerned, and so they reported that back and said, well, there's something amiss in the premises.
Task Force detectives rushed to the scene. What they found inside, no one was prepared for.
And inside the premises they found the body of a 60-year-old female lying in the hallway.
It was certainly a low point in our career and something we still think about often. I recall seeing the bloodstained hammer on the lounge room floor, on the carpeted floor, surrounded by what appeared to be blood.
The situation they faced then was, where was this John Glover?
I recall in the bedroom seeing a pair of men's trousers draped over the end of the bed. We then got to the bathroom and I saw the feet of John Glover sticking out of the bath. His mouth was barely above the waterline. He appeared to be unconscious and breathing very heavily. We saw a bottle of scotch, empty, with a paper bag, a number of vials of drugs, empty, on the vanity, as well as pill bottles.
Good evening. Tonight, a possible breakthrough in the year-long investigation into Sydney's granny killings. Detectives this afternoon charged a 58-year-old man with the murder of an elderly woman at Mossman.
In the bathroom, police found a 58-year-old man unconscious, immersed in a tub of water. He was revived by ambulance paramedics and taken to the Royal North Shore Hospital.
Police now knew they had the killer of 6 elderly women, but they needed to prove it.
We knew we had a job ahead of us. Although there was a feeling of satisfaction that this man was in custody, we lacked forensic evidence that could connect him to any of the other crimes.
The following morning, a search was conducted of Glover's car and home. Amongst the belongings, a pair of shoes, the soles of which were compatible to the print found on the carpet of his 5th victim's house. But they needed a confession.
We certainly hoped that Glover would talk to us, and that following morning he was sitting up in bed. And I recall speaking to him just in a general sense about non-issues, his family and so forth. And then at one point he came out with, you probably noticed the photographs in the paper of the women. They all bear a striking resemblance to my mother-in-law Essie. And that was significant to us because she featured in his suicide note from January. At that point, we believed that this man was taking responsibility, albeit in a brief way, for the murders of these elderly women on the North Shore. He also spoke in this conversation of using a hammer he had at home, of taking that hammer with him and leaving the car, placing the hammer down the front of his trousers, and then using the hammer to attack women from behind. After these murders, he would take that hammer home and use hydrochloric acid, which he kept in the backyard of his premises, to clean all traces of blood and other evidence from it. He was at pains during the course of his interviews to say that there was no sexual component to any of these murders, where Glover used pantyhose to strangle these women. He said he did so in order to make sure that they were dead. What amazed us all during the course of those interviews was the way in which Glover described committing these crimes. They were in such a matter-of-fact, everyday way that he spoke about these brutal slayings that it was extraordinary. It was like he was talking about making breakfast. In fact, during the course of each of the interviews, Glover clearly articulated that he would go to the club and drink beer with the money he'd just robbed from the victims.
After leaving hospital, Glover showed police where he disposed of the belongings of some of his victims. Like his killing field, the spot was not too far from his home.
2 Sydney psychiatrists have given evidence in the Supreme Court, diagnosing so-called granny killer John Glover as mentally ill. The defence is arguing that Glover is not guilty on 6 charges of murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility.
In an interview, the 58-year-old salesman had explained, "It's as if John Glover, the good guy, was watching John Glover, the bad guy. I felt powerless to stop it."
I asked him how he explained it. He said, well, the bad John Glover would come out and do the act, and then the good John Glover would then take over, which was very easily dealt with by saying, well, at what point did the good John Glover come out? Was it before you washed the hammer or afterwards? You see, it was very clumsy.
The jury rejected Glover's insanity plea. They found him guilty on all charges. Justice James Woods described Glover as a dangerous man who, if released back into the community, would almost certainly gratify his desire to kill.
Glover was given the maximum sentence for each offence. His file was marked, never to be released.
John Glover knew exactly what he was doing, that he intended to do what he did. He was cunning in how he did it, and I think that I would put him in the category of simply being bad, not mad.
John Wayne Glover had attempted to kill himself while on the outside and again behind bars. 15 years after he was found guilty, he was finally successful.
Sydney serial killer John Wayne Glover has died in prison. The man known as the Granny Killer was found dead today in a shower block at Lithgow Jail. He'd hanged himself. 72-year-old Glover was jailed in 1991 for the murders of 6 elderly women on the North Shore.
No family members attended Glover's funeral. He was buried as he lived, with his demons and secrets.
There are other crimes in Australia that have similarities to the crimes committed by John Glover. I still believe that there are certain aspects of his life and aspects of other crimes that may have been committed that one may never know about.
The headline sounds clean, final, closed. Florida 1992 cold case solved. But if you drive down that coastal highway at 2 in the morning, windows down, salt in the air, you'll feel it right away. Nothing about this story is solved. Not out here, not on this stretch of cracked asphalt where the bridge rises out of the mangroves like a dark spine. You can almost see her headlights still hanging in the mist, frozen in time, trapped in the year everything went wrong. This is Cypress Key, a quiet town with a loud memory, a place that wants to forget one name but can't. Emily Hart, 19 years old, waitress, missing, no body, no confession, just an idling car on a bridge in a town that's never slept properly since. It starts on a humid night in June 1992, the kind where the heat doesn't let go even after midnight, where the air sticks to your skin and the neon signs buzz like insects. Emily clocks out from the Bayside Diner at 1:47 a.m., rolls her eyes at the broken clock stuck at 1:32, scribbles her initials on a stained timesheet, and says goodnight. Her coworkers remember her voice, light, a little tired, already planning tomorrow. She's wearing a faded denim jacket over her uniform, keys jangling on a little pink dolphin keychain. She pushes open the back door, steps into the alley lit by a flickering light, and vanishes into the night like any other kid going home after a late shift. She doesn't know half the town will later replay that last walk on an endless loop. The Bayside sits just off the highway, a low, square building with peeling turquoise paint and a big hand-painted sign promising home-style cooking to tourists who mostly don't stop anymore. Across the road, a gas station, dark after midnight. Behind it, a strip of palms and scrub that hides the marsh. Beyond that, black water. Cypress Key is like a lot of small Florida towns. The crowds drive past it to somewhere better, but the locals stay. They fish, they gossip, they talk about football and hurricanes and who's cheating on who. And from 1992 onward, they talk about Emily. She never makes it home. At 3:07 a.m., a fisherman named Walter Briggs is driving across the harbor bridge, half asleep, country radio low, thinking about bait and tide charts. The night is thick, the river below barely visible. The mangroves a wall of shadow. Then he sees it, a small white Honda Civic pulled over at the midpoint of the bridge, hazard lights off, headlights on, engine running. Driver's side door open, hanging out over the road like a question. He slows down, watches for someone waving, someone hurt, someone drunk maybe. No one. The car just sits there, empty, humming quietly, the exhaust drifting up in the red glow of the taillights. Briggs pulls up behind it, gets out, calls into the dark. Nothing. Just the sound of cicadas and the distant slap of water against pilings. He steps closer, air conditioning roaring. Radio off, keys still in the ignition, a half-empty styrofoam cup of coffee in the cup holder, a lipstick-smudged straw. On the passenger seat, a purse, open, wallet visible, cash untouched. He leans over and sees the name on the ID without understanding what it will come to mean. Emily Hart, 19, Cypress Key address. He expects someone to climb out from the shadows laughing, apologizing, saying it's just a joke, just car trouble, just anything. No one does. He looks down, sees one more detail that will haunt investigators for decades. About 6 feet from the driver's door, almost at the edge of the bridge, lies a single white sneaker, laces splayed, toe pointing toward the rail. No blood, no drag marks, no skid marks, no sign of a struggle, just a running shoe on rough concrete like it decided to stop and the owner kept going. Beyond the rail is black water and the long drop down into it. Walter grips the rail and peers over, calling again, his voice swallowed by the dark. He doesn't see a body, doesn't hear a splash, just the slow, steady rush of tidal current carrying secrets out to sea. The sheriff's deputies arrive fast, lights strobing across the river, sirens cracking that fragile pre-dawn silence. One cruiser, then another, then the sheriff himself, pulling up in a brown sedan that looks tired of bad news. They tape off the bridge, photograph everything twice, 3 times. The open door, the keys, the sneaker, the purse. They dust the car for prints, swab the steering wheel, collect fibers, anything, everything. Standard procedure in a situation that already feels wrong. Cars break down. Drivers don't just disappear. By sunrise, word is spread. Cypress Key wakes up to find its bridge closed, patrol cars blocking both ends, reporters from the next town over already setting up tripods. The early news calls it a possible accident. The noon news calls it a developing situation. By evening, the words change. Mysterious disappearance. Young woman missing. Community shaken. That night, there's a knock on a white house with blue shutters on Seagrape Lane. Emily's mother, Linda, opens the door in her bathrobe and sees the sheriff standing there with his hat in his hands. 2 deputies behind him, faces blank. She knows before he speaks. She just doesn't know how bad knowing will get. They search the water first. Boats, divers, spotlights sweeping across the surface. They fan out under the bridge, scanning for any sign of a body, clothing, anything. The current is strong here, pushing out toward the Gulf, snagging on roots and driftwood. They drag the river for days. They find a rusted bicycle frame, an old shopping cart, a cooler lid, a broken lawn chair. No Emily, no torn uniform, no denim jacket. The white Honda Civic sits on a flatbed in a fenced lot, its headlights finally dark, its engine finally cold, holding on to whatever it knows. Inside the car, something is off. The driver's seat is pushed farther back than Emily's co-workers swear she ever had it. The rearview mirror is tilted up like someone taller had sat there last. The radio is tuned to a Spanish station out of Miami that she supposedly never listened to. Her coworkers say she hated static, always left it on top 40. It's a small detail, but small details are what cold cases are made of. In the ashtray, there's a cigarette butt. Strange, because Emily didn't smoke. At least that's what her mother says. That's what her boyfriend says. Nobody can explain it. Nobody ever will, not in a way that sticks. By day 3, the flyers go up. By day 5, the reporters from Miami arrive. By day 7, the words Florida 1992 cold case appear for the first time in a tiny column, a phrase that feels premature and cruel. How can it be a cold case when her bedroom still smells like her shampoo, when the calendar on her wall still shows June with little hearts around the date of a concert she never got to attend? How can it be a cold case when her mother still sits on the porch every night, watching the road, listening for a car that will never come? Officially, the sheriff calls it a suspicious missing person case with possible foul play. Unofficially, people in town start to talk. They talk at the diner where her section stays empty, at the grocery store where her picture is taped to the door, at the school where her younger brother walks through the halls surrounded by whispers. They say she ran away. They say she jumped. They say someone grabbed her. They say the bridge is cursed. They say a lot of things, but they all agree on one point. Nothing like this has ever happened here before. Cypress Key is no longer just a quiet town on a forgotten stretch of Florida coast. It is now a headline waiting to be written, a story waiting to be finished, a wound waiting to scar. The first 48 hours are chaos wrapped in procedure. Detectives map out Emily's last known movements, like trying to reconstruct the flight of a bird from the angle of a feather. She finishes her shift. She jokes with a coworker about the lousy tips from the church crowd. She wipes down tables, refills ketchup bottles, signs her timesheet. One customer remembers her bringing a slice of key lime pie to an older man sitting alone at the counter. Another swears he saw her arguing softly with someone by the coffee machine but can't describe a face, just a silhouette. The surveillance camera above the register, if you can call that grainy, flickering box a camera, cuts out at 1:28 a.m. and comes back at 1:46, the exact window they need, gone. The investigators start with the people closest to her. The boyfriend, Jake Lawson, 20, auto shop apprentice, known around town as a decent kid with a short fuse. He says he was home, asleep, that he never saw her that night. His alibi is his mother, eyes red, insisting she heard him come in before midnight, heard him snoring down the hall. Detectives watch the way his knee bounces under the table, the way his hands clench when they mention the white Honda on the bridge. They ask him if they ever fought. He says, "Of course we fought. We were together." They ask if she'd been unhappy. He says, "She was stressed, not unhappy." They ask if she was seeing anyone else. His jaw tightens. He doesn't like that question. Every line of inquiry branches, tangles, doubles back. Then there's her boss at the diner, Frank Rizzo, mid-40s, thinning hair, always smells like coffee and fryer grease. He insists he closed up right after Emily left, did the safe, turned out the lights, went home. His wife backs him up, sleepy and tense in her bathrobe when deputies knock at dawn. He says Emily was a good kid, maybe too trusting, a phrase that reporters will later repeat until it loses all meaning. He admits she sometimes walked to her car alone out back, that the alley didn't have a camera, that the light had been flickering for weeks. He'd meant to fix it. He hadn't. Now it's a detail on a list of things he will never forgive himself for. They canvass the area around the diner. A drunk at the bar next door says he saw a dark pickup cruising slow around closing time. A gas station clerk remembers a man in a baseball cap buying cigarettes and staring too long at the diner's back door. The descriptions don't match. Or maybe they do. Fear has a way of bending memory. The investigators write it all down. Every tip, every half-formed sighting, every rumor passed off as truth. The board in the incident room fills with photos and dates and arrows connecting nothing to nothing. Then comes the anonymous call. Dispatch logs it at 4:23 a.m., about an hour after the fisherman finds the car. A low, distorted voice, maybe male, maybe female, maybe just the bad line, says 5 words that will drive the entire investigation off the road. "Check the marsh, by mile 8. The call cuts off before they can trace it. No caller ID, no recorded number, nothing. They send units anyway. Patrol cars roll out to mile marker 8, where the highway dips low and the swamp comes close, thick with reeds and mosquitoes and the smell of rot. They search the tree line with flashlights, necklaces of light swinging through the dark. At first, they see nothing. But the marsh doesn't like to hold secrets lightly. At sunrise, one deputy spots something pale tangled in the reeds, half submerged, slick with mud. For a split second, his stomach drops. But it's not a body. It's fabric. Blue and white, a pattern of tiny flowers. A dress. Torn along one seam, heavy with water. Emily's mother will later identify it as one of her daughter's favorites. Nearby, dangling from a low branch as if someone had placed it there, glints a small silver chain with a dolphin pendant, twin to the one on her keychain. The implication is clear. She was here. For at least a moment, she was here. The sheriff holds a press conference that afternoon, sweat beading on his forehead under the camera lights. He confirms the discovery of items of interest linked to the missing girl. He reassures the town they are following strong leads. He asks for anyone who saw anything that night to come forward. Behind the podium, the evidence bags sit on a table, the dress and necklace reduced to objects in plastic, stripped of the life they once moved with. Reporters pounce on the anonymous call, the Marsh tip, the first real twist in what is rapidly becoming a media-ready mystery. The phrase, bizarre clue, makes its way into the evening news. The phrase, Florida 1992 cold case, isn't far behind. In living rooms across the state, viewers lean closer to their TVs. This isn't one of those big city crimes you expect from Miami or Tampa, they say. This is small town, homegrown, close to home. A girl disappearing from a bridge in the dead of night, a dress floating in a swamp, an anonymous call from nowhere. It feels like a movie, but it isn't. Not for the people who have to drive over that bridge to get to work, who now grip the wheel a little tighter, who now avoid looking at the spot where the white Honda sat idling alone. The investigation widens. State detectives come in. The FBI offers consultation. Helicopters sweep over the marsh and the woodlands. Volunteers in bright vests walk in long lines, eyes on the ground, stepping carefully through sawgrass and sand spurs. They find beer cans, shotgun shells, a broken lawn ornament, a pair of sunglasses, and countless snakes. They do not find Emily. The marsh keeps what it wants. Rumors evolve into stories, stories into legends. Teenagers dare each other to drive across the bridge at 3:07 a.m., the exact time the fisherman reported the car, and leave the engine running with the door open. They claim to hear footsteps, whispers, the click of keys. Some swear they've seen a girl in a diner uniform standing at the railing, looking down at the water, vanishing when the brights hit her. Adults tell them to stop. Secretly, some of the adults believe it too. Inside the sheriff's office, though, the tone is less supernatural, more desperate. The case file grows thicker, heavier, more complicated. Emily's school friends are interviewed, then re-interviewed. One girl mentions a man who had been calling Emily at work, hanging up when she answered. Another says Emily had complained about a pickup truck that seemed to follow her some nights. A third insists Emily had been excited about a new opportunity, but clams up when asked what that means. Teenage loyalty turns into teenage fear. Names are given, then revoked. Faces flash in and out of the suspect pool. Cypress Key, once united by boredom and habit, begins to fracture under the weight of suspicion. Everyone wonders who among them might be capable of pulling over on that bridge, adjusting the seat, leaving the radio on the wrong station, and walking away without a trace of guilt. The sheriff promises answers. The news trucks promise headlines. Emily's mother, sitting alone in a dim living room with the TV off, promises herself something much simpler. She will never move away, because if her daughter comes home, even after all this, she has to know where to find her. Pressure makes mistakes, and this case is under a pressure cooker lid. The sheriff needs a suspect. The town needs a villain. The cameras need a face to pin the crawl text under. It doesn't take long before the story narrows in on someone who checks too many lazy boxes. Miguel Santos, 32, seasonal worker, drifts up and down the state following construction jobs, spends some nights drinking alone at the bar near the diner. He has a record, petty theft, a bar fight, nothing like murder, but enough to color the way people look at him. Witnesses come forward saying they saw him near the Bayside the night Emily disappeared. One swears he watched Miguel staring at her car, smoking, expression unreadable. Detectives bring him in. The interview room camera, with its washed-out colors and faint hum, records every twitch. Miguel denies everything. He didn't talk to her. He didn't follow her. He walked past, went to his rented room, went to sleep. His English is fine until they push him, then phrase into fragments. Some people in town later interpret that as guilt, others as fear. They ask about the anonymous call. He laughs, short and bitter, says he doesn't even own a phone. When they mention the dress, the necklace, the car on the bridge, he just shakes his head. I didn't touch that girl, he says, over and over, as if repetition can build a wall. Still, the story begins to form. The out-of-towner, the drifter, the stranger, the press loves it. Florida, 1992, cold case solved, headlines tease, question mark dangling like bait. Talk radio hosts run with it, outraged that a man like Miguel was ever allowed to hang around town in the first place. No one has been charged yet, no evidence publicly presented, but it doesn't matter. Narrative fills the gaps law enforcement can't. Fingers point before proof does. Then a break, or what looks like one. A fingerprint lifted from the passenger side door of Emily's car appears to match Miguel's. The sheriff calls it a significant development. The local paper calls it the smoking gun. The community exhales in a collective, vengeful breath. Finally, someone to blame. Women in Cypress Key start sleeping with their windows open again, as if the presence of a suspect in handcuffs pushes back the dark. For a few days, the idea spreads that this might actually be over. But it's never that simple. In the lab, analysts go back over the prints. The match isn't as clean as reporters made it sound. Partial, smudged, like so much in this case. Enough for suspicion, not enough for certainty. The public doesn't hear that nuance. They do hear that Miguel had once been kicked out of the same bar Emily's coworkers frequent, that he'd argued loudly with the bartender, that someone overheard him muttering about girls who think they're better than you. They don't hear that half those details come from people who can't agree on dates or nights, or even who said what. A messy story gets told as a clean one. The DA leans in, then leans back. Without a body, without a clear forensic link, without a confession, she knows the case is weak. Juries want bodies. They want blood. They want something they can point to in the photos and say, yes, that's what happened. Here, there's just an empty car, a dress in a swamp, a necklace in a tree, and a man with the wrong face at the wrong time. Months pass. The pressure doesn't go away. It ferments. In October, something breaks. Not in the suspect, but in the case itself. A key witness, the bar patron who claimed he saw Miguel watching Emily's car that night, quietly changes his story. In a second interview, under more careful questioning, he admits he might be mixing up evenings. Could have been another night, he says. They all kind of blur. The supposedly damning moment turns out to be built on sand. Defense attorneys circle like sharks. The lab throws another wrench in. They finish analyzing hairs pulled from the passenger seat and the headrest. 2 are Emily's. The third is unidentified. The DNA profile is partial, degraded, pre-2000s tech struggling with old evidence. It does not match Miguel. That doesn't clear him, but it muddies the water just enough. Enough that the DA steps back from the ledge. We cannot ethically proceed at this time, she says in a dry statement that burns like acid in the mouths of people who wanted a neat ending. Miguel is released, no charges, no apology. The sheriff holds another press conference, this time without the reassuring phrases. He talks about continuing to pursue all leads, about ongoing analysis, about time-consuming forensic processes. The cameras catch the tension in his jaw. The headlines flip almost overnight. Florida 1992 cold case solved becomes Florida 1992 cold case unravels. The word botched starts to appear alongside investigation. The town's anger, once aimed outward at the stranger, begins to swivel uncomfortably inward. For Emily's family, it's another whiplash. They had started to imagine a trial, a verdict, something approaching closure. They had rehearsed in their minds what they might say in court, how they would sit, when they would look away. Now all of that collapses. They are back at the beginning, except worse. Before there was terror and hope mixed together. Now there is terror and emptiness. Someone did this. Someone walked away from that car on the bridge, maybe after wiping their hands on that blue dress. Someone knows why. And that someone is not sitting in a cell. They are free, maybe watching the news, maybe driving over that bridge every single day, alone with the truth. In the files, a small note appears in the margin of one detective's report, written in cramped pencil. We only ever looked where the light was. A comment on the bridge, the marsh, the obvious radius of search. They never had the resources to expand beyond that, not really. Not in a small county office with a tight budget and too many other calls. So the case slides, slowly, inexorably, from active to pending to something else. No one calls it cold yet, not out loud. But the temperature in the room is dropping. On the calendar, weeks turn into months. The flyers yellow and curl at the edges. The spot on the bridge where the car was found becomes just another stretch of concrete most days, a place commuters pass without looking. Until the anniversaries. On those nights, people stop, leave flowers, pause their engines. Some say they can feel the moment thickening, time folding back on itself, drawing them into that June night in 1992 when a fisherman in an old truck topped the rise of the bridge and saw a white Honda waiting for him like a ghost. Time does something cruel to unsolved cases. It doesn't erase them, it distorts them. Details that should stay sharp blur, while small, useless fragments remain crystal clear. People forget exact times, but remember what song was playing on the jukebox. They can't recall whether the car door was all the way open or half, but they will fight you over the color of the sky. By 1999, 7 years after Emily vanished, the case is more myth than file to most of Cypress Key's teenagers. They grew up on the ghost story version, not the police reports. They know the beats, the late shift, the bridge, the shoe, the dress, the anonymous call. They don't know the dead ends, the sleepless detectives, the boxes of evidence shoved onto high shelves. One person, though, refuses to treat it as a legend. Detective Dana Ruiz transfers into the county from a bigger city department that got tired of her stubbornness. She's in her early 30s, sharp eyes, hair pulled back tight, not interested in small-town pecking orders. On her second week, she wanders into the evidence room to get a file on a stolen boat and notices a large cardboard box in the corner, marked in fading black marker, Heart E, a missing person 1992. Someone has taped a printed label over it. Retain. Another word might as well be written underneath in invisible ink. Forgotten. Dana doesn't like forgotten. She signs the box out, hauls it to her desk, and starts reading. It's like stepping into another era. The photos have that early 90s grain, colors dulled, edges bent. The reports are typewritten in places, handwritten in others. She sees the car on the bridge, the sneaker, the dress in the marsh, the necklace dangling from the branch like bait. She reads statements from Walter Briggs, from Jake Lawson, from Frank Rizzo, from Miguel Santos. She sees the investigators' frustration bleeding through their professional language. She also sees something else, gaps. The timeline bothers her first. Emily clocks out at 1:47 a.m. Car found at 3:07. That's 80 minutes. The drive from the diner to the bridge takes 11, maybe 12. What happened in the missing hour? There's a note mentioning a call placed from the diner's landline at 1:52 to an unknown number. No follow-up sheet attached. Another note mentions a payphone call to Emily's house at 3:11 a.m., logged by the phone company coming from a booth just before the bridge. In the file, there's a single line. Mother reported answering, hearing static, possible wrong number. No one seems to have dug deeper. Dana leans back, imagines the phone ringing in that white house on Seagrape Lane at 3:11 a.m., 4 minutes after the fisherman finds the car, before the deputies even arrive. Imagine Linda Hart trudging down the hall, robe pulled tight, sleep still in her eyes, lifting the receiver, static, maybe a breath, maybe nothing. Then the click of disconnection. She puts the phone down, confused, goes back to bed. Within the hour, she will be dragged out of sleep again, this time by hard knocking at the door and the sheriff's hat in his hands. That call at 311 hangs in the air between those two moments, like a bridge of its own. Someone tried to reach that house, or someone dialed it by accident with trembling fingers in the dark. Dana tracks down the old phone records. It takes effort. The phone company has changed names twice in 7 years, and the data is archived on microfilm in a dusty storage unit. She finds it anyway. There it is in fuzzy ink, 3:11 a.m., originating line, Harbor Bridge payphone number 2, destination, heart res, call duration, 11 seconds of static, 11 seconds that do not appear in any headline, any anniversary piece, any campfire retelling, 11 seconds that never made it to the myth. She visits Linda Hart. The house is older now, paint peeling, garden overgrown in places, but the porch light still burns at night. Linda is thinner, hair streaked with gray, but her eyes are the same hard, bright blue as in the photos from 1992. Dana sits at the kitchen table and, gently, asks about the call. At first, Linda stares at her, blank, as if the detective is making it up. Then the wall cracks. "I thought it was a dream," she whispers. "I remember noise, like wind or water, then nothing. I told the sheriff, but he said it was probably some kids." "What if it wasn't?" Dana asks. Linda's hands tremble around her coffee mug. "Then it was her," she says. "Or whoever took her. But I can't think about that. Not that night. But she already is, because those 11 seconds have been sitting in the back of her mind for 7 years, like a splinter she could never find." Back at the station, Dana digs into the bridge, not the legend of it, but the structure, the routines, the maintenance logs. She learns that there were 2 payphones on either end in 1992. One has since been removed, the other hangs rusted, out of order, its coin slot jammed. She drives out there anyway, stands where that caller once stood, looks out over the water. Cars flick by, their headlights slicing through the warming air. She lifts the dead receiver, listens to silence, imagines static. Someone stood here. Someone looked back at the white Honda parked at the midpoint, door open, and dialed the number to a house with blue shutters. Was it a plea, a taunt, a mistake? She rereads the anonymous Marsh tip transcript. 5 words. "Check the Marsh by mile 8. The voice is flattened by the old tape recording, but she listens again and again. The accent is local, or almost. A catch on the chi sound, a slight drawl on Marsh, not enough to narrow down, but enough to rule out a few habitual liars who always insert themselves into big cases for attention. It feels real to her. Someone wanted them to find that dress. The question is why? The deeper she goes, the more the story breaks away from the neat version everyone thinks they know. The narrative of the drifter suspect, the solved case, the collapse, that's just one track. Beneath it runs a second one. Unfinished interviews. Leads not followed because manpower ran out. A note from a deputy about a blue pickup seen near mile 8 by an insomniac farmer that was never fully traced. A complaint filed by a waitress months before Emily vanished about a man who waited for her outside the diner 3 nights in a row. No one ever connected those dots, maybe because back then they didn't look like dots. They looked like noise. In the evidence box, there's also the cigarette butt from the Honda's ashtray. The lab report from 1992 dismisses it with a shrug. No DNA tech worth trusting yet. No way to tie it conclusively to anyone. It could have been hers, despite what everyone said. Could have been a coworker catching a ride. Could have been a stranger. In 1999, obsolete conclusions don't sit well with emerging science. Dana circles it in red. If this case is ever going to be more than a ghost story, it will be because something small and forgotten gets a second look. Because a cold case isn't really cold. It's just waiting for someone with fresh eyes and a different kind of stubbornness to strike a match and see what still burns. The cigarette butt is small, ugly, almost nothing. Brown filter, smudged paper, faint lipstick stain that could be a trick of the light. It has sat in a paper envelope inside a plastic bag, inside a cardboard box, for 7 long Florida years, waiting for a moment like this. Under harsh fluorescent lights in the county evidence room, it doesn't look like a key. It looks like trash, but for Dana, it's the one piece of this puzzle that doesn't care about rumors or faulty memories or anonymous calls. It's chemistry, it's biology. If it survived the heat and humidity and time, it's a voice that can still speak. She pushes for retesting like it's a life raft. The sheriff pushes back at first. Budget, backlog, politics. The lab is already drowning in current homicides, fresh blood on fresh concrete, cases with bodies and grieving families on the evening news. Why pour time and money into a ghost from 1992 when tonight's victims are still warm? Dana doesn't raise her voice. She just keeps showing up at his door with the same request phrased 10 different ways, the same stubborn fire in her eyes. Eventually, his resistance isn't about the lab anymore. It's about what happens if the test comes back and points somewhere they don't want to look. In the end, he sighs, signs the request, slides it across the desk. 1 run, he says. We get 1 shot. After that, it goes back on the shelf unless something big falls from the sky. She nods like she's just won the lottery. In a way, she has. The cigarette butt is shipped out, sealed and logged and escorted all the way to a state lab with newer machines, cooler air, analysts who were still in high school when Emily vanished from the bridge. In a chilled room full of humming equipment, a technician in gloves opens the bag, tips the butt onto a metal tray, and begins the slow, careful process of pulling a profile from the past. While the science ticks forward in invisible hours and minutes, life in Cypress Key drags on. The diner is under new management now. The turquoise paint has been replaced by a bland off-white. The neon sign has been upgraded to something brighter, less charming, less haunted. The regulars still sit in the corner booths, cups of coffee in front of them, talking about fishing and weather and property taxes. Occasionally someone mentions that detective from out of town, who keeps poking at old wounds. Most shrug, a few grumble. The teenagers who were kids in '92 now bring their own kids in for pancakes. Time layers itself over the crime scene like dust. Dana doesn't wait for the lab by sitting still. She goes back to the people who lived through the first investigation one by one, gently separating memory from myth. Some of them resent it. They've edited this story in their heads to make it survivable. They don't want a new cut. Others open up in ways they didn't or couldn't years ago. Age has peeled away their fear of sounding foolish. They tell her about small moments that didn't seem important at the time. A truck seen twice where it had no business being. A name that popped up in conversations like a splinter. A joke that landed wrong. She finds the deputy who wrote that margin note about only looking where the light was. He's retired now, living in a cramped condo inland, TV always on low in the background. His hands shake when he pours coffee. We did what we could, he tells her, defensive before she even accuses. She doesn't blame him. She only asks what kept him up at night. He doesn't hesitate. That damn call to the house, he says. We couldn't prove it was her, couldn't prove it wasn't. And the anonymous tip. I always thought that was someone who wanted to help but was terrified, or someone playing both sides. His eyes drift to the muted television, where another missing person's face fills the screen. Different town, same ache. The thing about revisiting old ground is that footprints change shape when you look at them from a new angle. Dana goes back to the payphone records, the diner's closing logs, even the jukebox playlist from that week, tracked down in a dusty machine repair notebook. She builds a timeline that ticks down, not just by minutes, but by choices. Somewhere between 1:47 a.m., when Emily walks out of the Bayside through that flickering back door, and 3:07 a.m., when a sleepy fisherman sees her car idling on the bridge, someone made a decision that destroyed an entire community's sense of safety. The car doesn't teleport. The dress doesn't float into the marsh on its own. The cigarette doesn't light itself. When the lab finally calls, it's not with a triumphant drum roll. It's with the tired voice of a scientist who has spent too many nights staring at peaks on a screen. They got something. Not a full, robust profile, but enough. Enough to say with confidence that the DNA on the cigarette does not belong to Emily Hart. It does not belong to her boyfriend. It does not belong to Miguel Santos. It does not match any of the officers or technicians whose reference samples were on file. It belongs to an unidentified male, approximate age impossible to determine, ethnicity impossible to pin down. And then comes the part that makes Dana's heartbeat jump. Entered into the National DNA Database, it yields a partial hit. Partial, a word that feels like stepping on a stair that isn't there. Somewhere in another state, another crime scene, another unclosed file, shares most of the same genetic markers. Not enough to declare, with courtroom certainty, that it's the same person. Enough to raise the hairs on the back of your neck. The other case is older too, from 1990, 2 years before the bridge, from a different coast, a different life. A woman attacked in a parking lot, left beaten but alive, cigarette burns on her arms, shaken, traumatized, unable to describe her attacker beyond white, maybe, late 20s, early 30s, smelled like gasoline and cheap cologne. The report from that case mentions a cigarette butt in the car's ashtray, analysis inconclusive at the time. Now, under better machines, it sings the same almost song, a majority of markers lining up with the one from Emily's Honda. But not all, analysts argue. Could be the same man, could be a close relative, could be a lab artifact. In the neat world of courtroom diagrams, could be is poison. In the messy world of cold cases, it's oxygen. Dana pins copies of both profiles side by side on a board only she really looks at. She draws a line between them, not as an assertion but as a question. A possible traveler, a man who may have drifted from one coast to another, targeting women in liminal spaces. A parking lot, a bridge, The thin gap between a late shift and home. It's not enough to stand on, but it's enough to keep her from sleeping. She traces the 1990 case back to its jurisdiction, calls the detective who worked it. He's near retirement, voice gravelly, surprised anyone remembers that file. "We never got him," he says. "She lived, thank God, but she moved away. Wouldn't testify, couldn't handle it. We had nothing to hold on to." Dana asks if he remembers anything about cigarettes. He laughs, dry. "It's Florida," he says. "Everybody smoked. But yeah, she did say he smoked in her car, like he owned it." When she brings up the partial DNA hit, there's a long silence on the line. "You think your bridge girl and my parking lot girl met the same devil?" he asks at last. She doesn't answer directly. She doesn't have to. Back in Cypress Key, the official line doesn't change. Publicly, the sheriff's office stops short of connecting the cases. Statements go out carefully worded, talking about ongoing forensic analysis and possible investigative avenues. They don't say what everyone feels, that somewhere out there a man has walked through multiple lives like a storm, leaving broken things and no return address. The community, mostly unaware of DNA sequences and partial hits, just hears that the case is active again. For a few days, hope flares, then it settles into something rougher, edgier, because activity isn't the same as answers. Word spreads anyway, because it always does. Coffee shop whispers about a serial something flit through town. Parents tighten curfews. Old arguments resurface. Some people wonder loudly if they owe Miguel an apology. Most don't say it out loud. Some shake their heads and say they knew all along it wasn't the drifter, that it had to be somebody local, somebody who knew her schedule, her route, her habits. That's the theory that makes everyone's skin crawl the most, and that's exactly why it won't die. Dana leans into that possibility, not because she likes it, but because the evidence keeps nudging that way. The cigarette could belong to a stranger, someone who popped into town for a night and vanished down the highway by dawn. Or it could belong to someone who went to school here, who pumps gas at the station, who stands in line at the grocery store checking expiration dates, someone who knew the diner's closing time, who knew where the payphones were, who knew that at 3 a.m. the bridge is empty but for fishermen and insomniacs and the occasional cop. She starts remapping the local men in Emily's orbit. Not just the obvious ones, the boyfriend, the boss, the bar regulars, but the quieter figures, the customer who always sat in the same booth and left tips in exact change, the mechanic who worked on her car 2 weeks before the disappearance, the teacher who wrote her a recommendation letter and insisted she could do better than this town, the neighbor with the barking dog who always seemed to be out sweeping his driveway when she came home. At the time, none of them were more than names in passing on a long list. Now, with the benefit and curse of hindsight, every name hums with possibility. In the Hart House, a different kind of remapping is happening. Linda keeps a box under her bed, full of things she couldn't bear to give away, things she couldn't bear to look at. A perfume bottle with a cracked cap, ticket stubs from a fair, a hairbrush with long brown strands still twisted in its bristles. For years she has treated that box like a live wire. Lately, at night, she finds herself pulling it out, lifting each item like it might speak at last. She hears rumors about the case being open again, about new science, new detectives. She tries not to let hope in. Hope, she's learned, is just another way to fall. But one evening, as the sky over Cypress Key bleeds from orange to purple, she does something she hasn't done in a long time. She writes a letter, not to the sheriff, not to the DA, not to some TV show, to Emily. She sits at the kitchen table under the same old light fixture, pen scratching across a yellow legal pad, and tells her daughter everything that has happened since 1992. The new grocery store, the day the big oak in the front yard finally came down in a storm, her brother moving 2 towns over, the detective with dark hair and tired eyes who keeps coming by, who looks at old photos like they're crime scenes, who seems to care more than the others did. Linda doesn't believe in ghosts, not really, but she believes in talking to someone who isn't there. It's the only way to make the silence bearable. The letter will never be sent. It will join the box under the bed, another piece of evidence in a private archive of grief. But if you wanted to understand what this case really did to Cypress Key, you would start there in that small kitchen, with a woman writing to a girl who stepped out of a diner one humid night and never came back. You would listen to the scratch of the pen, the ticking of the clock, the low hum of a refrigerator that has outlived a child. Because the headlines talk about Florida 1992 cold case solved, as if it is a story with a clean start and finish. On the ground, where the bridge still arcs over dark water and the marsh still holds its secrets, the story never stopped. It just changed shape, found new ways to haunt. And somewhere out there, in a town that doesn't know the name Cypress Key, a man walks down a sidewalk, lights a cigarette, exhales without a flicker of memory for a white Honda left idling on a bridge. His DNA sits in 2 envelopes in 2 different states, a silent thread between crimes officially separate, unofficially linked by a shared chill. He doesn't know yet that a detective who hates forgotten boxes has drawn a red line through his shadow. He doesn't know that, for the first time in years, the dark water under Harbor Bridge is not the only thing watching him. The man on the sidewalk lights his cigarette and keeps walking, and the world keeps turning, and Cypress Key keeps trying to forget. Years stack on years. New houses go up along the coast, old ones sink into the marsh. Kids who weren't born in 1992 grow up hearing about the girl on the bridge like she's part campfire story, part warning. The Bayside Diner changes hands again. The payphones at Harbor Bridge are finally removed, leaving only rusted bolts in concrete and a memory in the shape of a metal box. And somewhere in a temperature-controlled storage room, that cigarette butt in its plastic coffin waits for a story to catch up to it. Then the story jumps channels. It's 2004 when the producers call. Cable TV is hungry, and true crime is the flavor of the month. They've dug through old headlines and found it. A missing waitress, a car on a bridge, an anonymous call, a dress in the marsh, a stranger suspect, a drifter cleared, a town divided, a case that never really died. They say the title out loud like a spell. Florida 1992 cold case solved. They love the question mark. They love the visuals. They love the bridge. The sheriff doesn't love any of it. He's older now, hair thinner, patience shorter. He has new cases, new bodies, new grieving mothers to sit with. The last thing he wants is a TV crew turning his unfinished business into entertainment. But they're offering something he can't: national airtime, a reenactment, a toll-free tip line, fresh eyes in a country full of strangers who might have seen something, heard something, once knew a man who said something in a bar after too many beers. Dana is the one who nudges him over the line. "We've been talking to the same people for a decade," she says. "Maybe it's time we talk to people we've never met." The crew arrives with cases of equipment and practice sympathy. They scout the diner, the marsh, the bridge. They ask to film in the Hart House. Linda says yes, then no, then yes again. They want everything: childhood photos, school yearbooks, home videos of birthdays where Emily blows out candles and smiles straight into the camera with no idea she is building B-roll for a documentary about her own disappearance. Dana watches them set up shots. The empty booth where Emily used to serve coffee, the alley behind the diner with the flickering light recreated by a gaffer, the bridge at dusk with a rental Honda rolling slowly into place, and feels something tighten in her chest. The story is being fixed in images now. Whatever they show will be what the world believes. They interview Walter Briggs, the fisherman, older now, sunspots on his hands, eyes still haunted by headlights on an empty bridge. They interview Miguel Santos over a shaky video call from another state, where he's tried to build a life far from the town that nearly fed him to the system. He's wary, voice tight. "They decided I was guilty before they even knew my name," he says into the lens. "Now you want me to help?" But he talks anyway because he's tired of the drumbeat in his own head. They interview Jake Lawson, the boyfriend, now a man in his 30s, oil under his fingernails, a permanent squint from working under hoods. He answers from a folding chair in his mother's cluttered living room, the same house the sheriff visited that first week. He still carries the tilted guilt of someone who didn't do it but can't prove he couldn't have. The cameras come for Dana too. She sits in a plain chair, file boxes behind her, bridge photos on the wall. The interviewer leans in just off camera, voice soft, practiced. "Detective, do you believe this case can be solved?" She knows what the producers want. They want a soundbite. They want hope wrapped in authority. She could talk about DNA advances, partial profiles, the thin red line connecting one cigarette butt to another. She could talk about the 11-second phone call at 3:11 a.m., the anonymous marsh tip, the local names that still make her pen press harder into her notepad. Instead, she looks straight into the lens and says, "I believe someone out there knows exactly what happened, and I believe they're still alive." They shoot reenactments at night. A young actress in a borrowed diner uniform clocks out, walks through the back door, crosses the parking lot. A white Honda rolls onto the bridge, door left ajar, lights blazing against the darkness. A stunt shoe is placed just so on the concrete. A crew member tosses a dress into the marsh under controlled conditions while another operator captures the fabric as it blooms briefly on the water's surface. Everything is carefully staged, blocked, lit. The assistant director calls for more fog on the bridge. Nature obliges. It's late, the river is warm, the air cooler. Mist rises on cue, curling around the headlights, just like it did for Walter Briggs in 1992. Watching it, Dana feels a shiver that has nothing to do with the night air. This is the way stories mutate, true details spliced with manufactured mood. The show will cut between the reenactment and the interviews, layering narration over everything, adding tense strings, pauses in the right places. They'll show the cigarette butt in an evidence bag for half a second, zoom in on the dolphin pendant like it's a thriller prop. They'll end on a plea for information and a toll-free number flashing in bold white letters. It's a machine, efficient, relentless. But machines can sometimes shake loose what humans alone can't. When the episode airs, Cypress Key gathers around screens. Bars turn the volume up, living rooms dim the lights. The Hart House is quiet, but for the television, the glow washing over Linda's face as an actor's hand, not Emily's, reaches out to switch off the diner's lights for the last time. The narrator's voice is deep, urgent. Florida, 1992. A young waitress vanishes on a lonely bridge. Was it suicide, abduction, or something far more disturbing? Old wound, new packaging. They get things wrong. They compress the timeline, imply the dress was found the same night when it wasn't, play up the idea of a mysterious stranger over the more complicated mess of local suspicion. They title the episode The Girl on Harbor Bridge, and in the promos, in the TV guide blurbs, online and on cable crawls, the hook line appears over and over. Florida, 1992 cold case solved. The question mark is small. The suggestion is not. For people who never look past the headline, the story is already filed away as closed. But out beyond Cypress Key, the signal spreads. Hundreds of miles away in a suburb 2 states over, a woman named Laura is half watching the show while folding laundry. She isn't interested at first. Another sad story. Another missing girl she never met. Then the reenactment reaches the marsh. The narrator mentions the anonymous call, the phrase, "Check the marsh by mile 8. The dress, the dolphin necklace." The camera cuts to a prop version of that pendant turning slowly in the light. Something in Laura's chest clenches. She has seen that necklace before, not just on screen, in real life, years ago. Dull silver, cheap with a small chip on the fin. She remembers a night in 1993 when a man she was dating slid something out of his pocket and rolled it between his fingers while he talked. Not to show her, not as a gift, just as a habit, like a worry stone. She remembers asking, casually, what it was. He'd shrugged, said, "Just something I found near a swamp down in Florida. Must have belonged to some teenager." He'd laughed then, a short, hollow sound. She'd felt cold in August. Back then, she pushed it away. There were other things about him that were worse. The temper, the way he talked about women, the way he'd squeeze her wrist a little too hard when he was angry. She left him after 6 months, changed her number, moved apartments. She never reported anything, never told anyone about the necklace. It was just one uncomfortable memory among many. Until tonight, when the scripted narrator on her TV uses the exact word she remembered, marsh. Laura sits down hard on the edge of the couch, laundry forgotten. The show moves on, but she doesn't see it. She sees his face instead. His name, where he said he was from. Road work, construction, lots of traveling, lots of out-of-state contracts. He'd once mentioned a little town he'd worked near. Something about cheap motels and good fishing. Cypress something. Cypress Key? Cypress Bay? She can't be sure. Memory is a cruel archivist, but the shape of it is enough to make her palms sweat. At the end of the episode, the number flashes on screen. If you have any information about the disappearance of Emily Hart, please call. Laura doesn't wait for the rest. She picks up the phone with shaking hands, dials, leaves her name when the operator asks, then starts talking fast, spilling out a story she's never told in full. About the man, about the necklace, about the marsh, about the way he flinched when the news came on if it mentioned Florida. She apologizes 4 times for maybe wasting your time. The operator tells her she isn't. The tip is logged, time-stamped, routed. It lands on Dana's desk 2 days later, buried in a stack of messages the show generated. Most are noise. People who saw something on the bridge once. People who have visions. People who are sure the culprit is a long-dead relative who confessed on their deathbed. But this one is different. It has details. It doesn't push a theory. It offers a memory. The man's name. The fact that he smoked constantly. The job sites. The mention of a little Florida town by the marshes not far from a bridge where some girl went missing, and the necklace, always the necklace. There's another piece that makes Dana sit up straighter, the dates. Laura places the relationship firmly in 1993, but one night, she says, he'd gotten very drunk and started talking about something that happened a couple of years ago, about how it's lucky they never found her, and how cops are stupid if you keep moving. He hadn't said where exactly, just somewhere down there with a vague gesture south. When she asked, he'd shut down, gone cold, turned mean. "You asked too many questions," he'd said. She left 2 weeks later. The name he gave her back then? Mark Ellison. Dana has seen that name before. It's in the 1992 file, half buried. A line in an early report. Spoke with road crew supervisor Mark E. Night work on Route 7 confirmed no crew near Harbor Bridge after midnight. Another note, written later and never followed up. Possible blue pickup registered to Emps Ellison seen near mile 8 on 0615 by local farmer. Patrol found no one when canvassing. The name was logged, checked off, left behind. Ellison finished his contract, got in his truck, drove out of Cypress Key, and evaporated into the wider map. Now he's back, not in person, but in pixels and ink, on schedule logs, paycheck stubs, scattered mentions in other counties' roadwork records, on Laura's tip form, on a partial rental agreement from a motel near the Bayside Diner from June 1992, which lists a M. Ellison from out-of-state paying cash. The signature is messy, but it's the kind of mess you repeat across documents. Data that meant nothing alone begins to hum when placed together. The blue pickup, the marsh, the cigarettes, the cheap cologne, the restless work on highways that all look the same in the dark. Dana pulls every thread. She calls Laura, listens again, gently pries for more. She tracks Ellison through DMV records, employment files, background checks that were never run because no one thought to. She learns he was arrested twice in his early 20s for bar fights, never convicted. Learns he bounced from job to job, never stayed long, always leaving just before trouble fully bloomed. Learns that in 1990, he did a short stint in the same city where the parking lot attack happened, the one with the nearly matching DNA. Learns that in 1991, he was cited for trespassing near a riverside park after hours. The pattern isn't proof. It is a shadow matching the outline of something she's been chasing for years. She finds one more thing, hidden in an old incident log from 1993 in another county entirely. There's a domestic disturbance call, a neighbor reported shouting, a woman screaming, glass breaking. By the time officers arrived, the man was gone. The woman refused to press charges, refused to give many details, just said it was over now and that he won't be back. The name on the form, Ellison, Mark, no middle initial, no follow-up. The address leads to a building that's since been knocked down, replaced by a parking structure. The woman might have moved 3 times since or changed her name. There's no easy way to find her. But the echo is there, a man who leaves broken things and silence behind him. When Dana brings all of this to the sheriff, he stares at the board for a long time. Photos, copies of signatures, highlighted lines, the arc of a life that runs too close to too many bad nights. We don't have DNA tying him, he says. We don't have a confession. We don't have a body. We have 100 maybes. She knows. She also knows that cold cases are built on maybes that crystallize under pressure into something stronger. The cigarette butt in the Honda, the cigarette butt in the parking lot, the partial hit between them, the man whose hands always smelled like smoke and gasoline, according to the woman on the phone. We at least have a name to say out loud, she answers. A real one, not the drifter, not some stranger, a name that was here, a man who could have been at the diner, at the marsh, at the bridge, without anyone looking twice. She taps the board right over his signature on the motel register. He was here, on that week, in that town. The sheriff exhales slow. Then we find him, he says. The problem is, Ellison hasn't left a crisp trail since the late 90s. His last known address is a P.O. box. His last known job is a subcontractor for a company that went bankrupt. He might be using another name. He might be dead. He might be living in a rented room 2 states over, still smoking, still watching the news with that same hollow laugh when they say, unsolved. Finding him will take more than one detective and an old case file. It will take time, requests, coordination with other jurisdictions, the kind of grinding work that never makes the cut in TV reenactments. Outside, Cypress Key absorbs the ripple from the show. Old wounds itch. Some people say the coverage was exploitative. Others say it was necessary. Teenagers drive out to Harbor Bridge and take selfies where the reenactment shot its dramatic angles. Someone sprays, "Where is she?" in red on the concrete railing one night. City workers wash it off the next morning. You can't scrub the question out of the air that easily. In the Hart House, the TV is off now, but the episode replays in Linda's mind anyway. She hated seeing actors play her daughter, hated the way the narrator's voice turned Emily into the victim instead of the messy, funny, impatient girl she was. And yet, when the credits rolled and the 1-800 number faded, she felt something she hadn't in years. Not hope, not exactly. Something more dangerous, the sense that somewhere, someone may have recognized a laugh, a habit, a sentence. That somewhere, a man might have seen his own reflection in those reenactments and felt, for the first time, the old bridge reaching back toward him. Florida 1992 cold case solved, the TV promos boasted, as if resolution was part of the package. Clips of the bridge, the marsh, the diner flash under the word solved, stamped in bold letters for dramatic effect. But in the quiet corners of the case file, in the late-night phone calls between detectives, in the eyes of a mother who still sets an extra plate at Thanksgiving, nothing is solved. A name has surfaced, a shadow has sharpened, the hunt, long stagnant, has twitched back to life. The story hasn't ended, it's just found a new way to begin again. They start with the name and push it through every system that will take it. Mark Ellison, common enough to be a nuisance, specific enough to sting every time it pops up. DMV records, contractor licenses, old payroll ledgers from roadwork companies that barely exist now. Absorbed and renamed and buried under new logos. Some hits are clearly wrong. A 70-year-old in Ohio, a teenager in Arizona. Others are maybes, half matches, missing social security digits, clipped signatures. It's like chasing a shadow across water. Every time Dana thinks she's got him pinned, the surface ripples and the outline breaks apart. But patterns don't lie, even when people do. One cluster of records keeps tugging her attention west. A string of short-term construction gigs in small towns along the Gulf. 3 to 6 months each, never renewing, never staying long enough to put down roots. One job stands out, a highway resurfacing project outside a town in Louisiana in 2003. The crew list includes a M. Ellison, out-of-state license, no forwarding address. The town is just big enough to have a bar, a motel, a sheriff's office, and a newspaper that printed a tiny story that year about an unidentified man harassing women in a grocery store parking lot. The story never went anywhere. An officer scared the man off. The victims didn't press charges. The description is vague, mid-30s, white, smelled like cigarettes. It's nothing and it's not nothing. Dana circles it anyway. She gets lucky on a Thursday afternoon when a bored clerk at an old contracting company finally finds the box she's been asking for under 3 others in a back room that smells like dust and forgotten overtime. The box holds time cards from the early 90s, handwritten names, punch in, punch out, mileage reimbursements scribbled in the margins. There he is. Ellison, M. Cypress County Project, June 92, week of the disappearance. His listed address is a motel on Route 7. Another line shows a per diem marked for bridge work, night shift. For 3 nights that week, he billed extra hours, 2 days before Emily disappeared, the night she disappeared, the night after. On paper, he's exactly where he needs to be everywhere. Near the diner, near the marsh, near the bridge. Dana drives back to Cypress Key with those photocopied sheets on the passenger seat, glancing at them at red lights as if they might rearrange into a confession. They don't, they just sit there, inanimate, incriminating, not enough. The sheriff studies them with his glasses low on his nose, expression moving from skepticism to unease. We had his name, he mutters. We talked to him, we asked about night work. He lied to our faces. There's anger there, but it's as much at himself as at the ghost they never pinned. So we go ask him again, Dana says. Simple sentence, not a simple task. Finding a man who does not want to be found is a quiet war. They put out inquiries to other departments, float the name at conferences, nudge marshals and FBI contacts, not because they're officially involved, they're not, but because everyone owes someone a favor. They track down an old foreman who remembers a Mark Ellison with a smart mouth and a mean streak, who liked to hit on waitresses and didn't like the word no. He was the kind of guy who made you feel like you had to take a shower after shaking his hand, the man says over the phone. I kicked him off a job once for mouthing off. He just laughed, said there were plenty of roads in this country left to pave. The first solid hit comes from something stupid. It's almost always something stupid. A speeding ticket in a small Texas town 4 months ago. Driver, Ellison, Mark. Address, a trailer park on the edge of town. Vehicle, blue Ford pickup, older model, mismatched paint on the passenger door. The citation is mundane, 10 miles over the limit. But the officer's handwriting scratches a note in the margin. Smelled like smoke, very talkative. Says he's between jobs. The address may not be current, he may already be gone. But it's the best thread they've had in years. They drive out there before they can talk themselves into waiting. The route feels eerily familiar. Long stretches of flat highway, power lines slipping past like tally marks. Sky too big, sun too harsh. Not Florida, but close enough that the air tastes the same. Humid, tired, full of secrets. The trailer park sits beyond a gas station in a rusted playground, ringed by scrub and dust. A faded sign creaks at the entrance. Kids' bikes lie on their sides in the dirt. A dog barks from somewhere you can't see. Lot 14, newer tire tracks in front of an older trailer, aluminum siding dented, one-step cinder blocks, one window covered by a blanket instead of curtains. A pair of boots sits by the door. A plastic ashtray overflows on the makeshift porch railing, cigarette butts piled like tiny gravestones. Dana's stomach tightens. The sheriff shifts his weight beside her. You ready? He asks. She nods, though she isn't sure what that would even mean here. They knock. Silence at first, then footsteps. The door opens halfway, chain engaged. A man looks out. He is older than in the 1992 photo they dug up from the contractor's ID card, softer around the jaw, eyes more hooded. But it's him, the bone structure lined up under extra years, the thin scar near the left eyebrow, the way his gaze moves, fast, assessing, too calm. He smells like smoke and something chemical. Oil, maybe, or asphalt dust that never fully washes out. Behind him, a TV plays a game show at low volume in a dim room. "Mark Ellison?" the sheriff asks. The man's eyes flicker just once to the badges, to the unmarked car visible over their shoulders. He could slam the door. He could run. He does neither. He smiles, thin, practiced. "Haven't heard that name in a while," he says. "Who's asking?" They show their IDs, say their names, say Cypress County, Florida, and watch his pupils contract almost imperceptibly. Say, "We'd like to talk to you about some work you did in '92, say Bayside Diner and Harbor Bridge and Emily Hart," and watch that practiced smile freeze, then adjust like a mask being swapped out. "Yeah," he says, eventually shrugging. "I worked down there back then, a long time ago. Don't remember much. A lot of bridges, a lot of tar. You folks came around back then too, if I recall. Asked us all questions ad nauseum." He pronounces the Latin carefully, like he's proud of knowing it. "I told him I didn't know anything then. Same answer now." He tries to make it sound bored. It just sounds controlled. They ask if they can come in. He hesitates, then unhooks the chain. It's a small choice, but it cracks the air between them. Inside, the trailer smells like stale smoke and cheap food. An ashtray sits on the coffee table, next to an open beer can with condensation dried on the outside. The couch sags. A single lamp throws a hazy pool of light. On the wall, instead of photos, there's a faded poster of a muscle car and a calendar from a tire shop. They don't accuse him. Not yet. They let the questions come slow, deliberate, layered. "Where were you working that week? Who did you drink with? Did you ever eat at the Bayside? Did you know a girl named Emily?" He gives answers that are almost answers. "We had a big crew, hard to remember faces. I might have grabbed coffee. I didn't know anyone by name, no." He claims he never went near the marsh. Claims he never crossed Harbor Bridge except in the work truck. Claims he never owned a dolphin necklace, never saw one, doesn't know why they're asking. Dana watches his hands. He doesn't fidget much, but when he does, it's always toward the pack of cigarettes on the table. Fingers brushing the cardboard, thumb tapping the edge. When she mentions the parking lot assault from 1990, his eyes narrow. "You trying to pin every bad thing in this country on me, detective?" he asks, a little heat in his voice now. "Because you got a long list to work through." "We're just trying to understand a pattern," she says quietly. "You were there, both times, that's all." He leans back, head tilting, something like amusement cutting through his mask. "Lots of men do road work, sweetheart," he says, letting the word dangle between them like bait. "You gonna chase all of us down 20 years later because some girl went for a swim off a bridge?" There it is. The ugliness slipping through, not a confession, not even close, but a worldview exposed. People who disappear are just people who went for a swim. People who get hurt must have been asking for something. People like him are never truly at fault. It's all one bad joke to him. They don't bite. You don't snap back at a man like this. You record, you note, you file away every sentence that might play differently later to a jury, if you ever get that far. Eventually, the sheriff stands. "We appreciate your time," he says. "We may need to speak again. Please don't leave town without letting us know." It's theater. They have no legal hold on him, but they say it anyway. Ellison smiles. "No plans," he answers. "This town's as good as any." On the way out, Dana pauses by the coffee table. The ashtray is full. The beer can is half drained. "Want me to take that for you?" she asks casually, already pulling a tissue from her pocket. She picks up the can without waiting for an answer, dabs the rim like she's being polite about condensation. His eyes flick to the gesture, linger half a beat, then move on. Maybe he notices, maybe he doesn't. It doesn't matter now. The rim is theirs. Back in the car, she seals the tissue in a small plastic envelope, writes the date and time and address. Chain of custody, Hope, in a 4-inch strip of crinkling polymer. "You think he's our guy?" the sheriff asks, watching the trailer shrink in the side mirror. Dana stares at the envelope, at the road ahead, at the horizon line that looks too much like the one by Harbor Bridge. "I think," she says slowly, "if that DNA comes back clean and it's not him, I'm going to have a hard time believing in anything anymore." The sample goes to the lab with higher priority this time. Not because the system cares about old ghosts, but because people do, and sometimes people can nudge systems. They wait. Days stretch. Back in Florida, the bridge stands, indifferent. Cars roll over it night after night. The marsh near Mile 8 hums with insects and secrets. The Bayside closes at midnight and reopens at 6, life relentless looping. Linda hears through the small-town grapevine that they found someone. The words are vague, slippery. She doesn't call the sheriff. She has learned not to chase every rumor. But she listens harder to the phone when it rings. She sleeps even less. She finds herself walking to the kitchen window at odd hours, looking at the road lit silver by streetlights, remembering headlights that never appeared. When the lab report finally arrives, it doesn't come with sirens or drum rolls or TV cameras. It comes as an email with an attachment, a file name full of dates and numbers, a few lines that could mean everything or nothing. The analyst confirms the DNA from the beer can matches the profile from the cigarette in Emily's Honda. It also matches the partial profile from the 1990 parking lot assault, within statistical ranges that make scientists comfortable and defense attorneys nervous. It is not a maybe anymore. It is a line drawn from one man to two crime scenes, 13 years apart. On paper, in the language of reports, it's just a series of markers lining up. In the room where Dana reads it, it feels like the air has been punched out of her lungs. She prints the page, holds it, looks at the name at the top, Ellison, Mark. The shadow has a body now. The ghost has fingerprints and a current address and a pack of cigarettes on a coffee table in a trailer that suddenly looks a lot like a crime scene waiting to happen. It's still not enough. No body, no witness, no confession. A prosecutor can argue circumstantial webs and DNA links until they're hoarse. A defense lawyer can stand up and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, all you have is a man who smoked in the wrong car," and a jury might nod. But something fundamental has shifted. For the first time since 1992, the phrase Florida 1992 cold case solved starts to slip from speculative headline to internal memo. One more piece, Dana thinks. One more crack in his armor. One more woman willing to speak. One more detail from a night in June when a white Honda sat alone on a bridge with its engine running and its door open, waiting for someone to give it meaning. In the meantime, Ellison sits in his sagging trailer, TV flickering, cigarette smoke curling toward a stained ceiling. He doesn't know that his beer can betrayed him. He doesn't know that two envelopes hundreds of miles apart now hum with the same pattern in a database someone finally took the time to parse. He flips through channels, lands on a rerun of a crime show, smirks at the neat way they tie everything up in 42 minutes. Real life's not like that, he mutters to himself, stubbing out his cigarette. In Cypress Key, real life agrees. Real life is slower, messier, meaner. Real life is a bridge that still doesn't have flowers on it because some people can't bear to leave anymore. Real life is a mother who folds and refolds a letter to her missing daughter, wondering if somewhere a stranger is about to say the words she has dreaded and craved for 13 long years. We found him. Real life is a detective staring at a profile printout that should feel like victory and instead feels like standing at the edge of deep water, knowing that what's down there is finally moving, finally rising, but still far from the surface. The word they use on the paperwork is simple, clinical, almost bland, probable. Probable cause, probable connection, probable link between one man and a bridge that never really left 1992. But inside that thin word is a storm. DNA matches, time cards, motel registers, a beer can on a stained coffee table in a trailer 4 states away. A woman who remembers a necklace flickering between a man's fingers as he talked about a marsh. The pattern is no longer a ghost scribbled in red string on a detective's board. It's a shape with edges. They move fast before the edges blur again. The affidavit is thick, stapled, signed, sealed. A judge skims the pages, eyes catching on the phrases that matter. Forensic match, prior assault, geographic and temporal proximity, pattern of conduct. The stamp hits the paper with a thud. Warrant granted, search, seizure, arrest. 3 words that have been waiting 13 years to land on the right name. They don't go at midnight like in the movies. They go just after dawn, when the sky is a pale bruise and the trailer park is only half awake. A few curtains twitch. A dog tied to a stake barks itself hoarse. Kids still in pajamas watch from behind screen doors, the scene already embedding in their memories as something they'll talk about in 20 years. Unmarked sedans roll in first, then a marked car for show. Lights off, no sirens. The noise comes from boots on gravel, radios crackling low, the hand that knocks hard on the metal door of Lot 14. This time when the door opens, there's no chain. Ellison blinks in the early light, hair flattened on one side, eyes red from too little sleep or too much beer. It doesn't matter. He takes in the scene fast, more officers than before, the sheriff's expression no longer curious but sharp, Dana standing slightly behind, hands empty but shoulders coiled. He doesn't try to smile this time. "Mark Ellison," the sheriff says, voice flat. "You're under arrest on suspicion of kidnapping and homicide in the disappearance of Emily Hart." The name hits the air like a dropped plate. Somewhere inside the trailer, the TV is still on, game show host laughing faintly at a joke that doesn't land here. Ellison's jaw tightens. For a moment, he looks almost amused. 13 years late to the party, aren't you? He says. but his eyes flick to the detective's hands, the paper in them. Warrant. Authority. The shape of a trap finally closing. They read him his rights. He listens, expression bored, but his fingers twitch at the mention of anything you say can and will be used against you. Hands go behind his back. Steel clicks. The sound is loud in the morning stillness. Neighbors murmur. Someone whispers, "What did he do?" Another answers, "Florida something," because that's what they heard, because details haven't caught up yet. As they walk him to the car, he turns his head toward Dana. There's a sliver of curiosity in his gaze now. "You really think you've got this all figured out, don't you?" he says, voice low enough that only she hears. "You don't know anything." The words aren't shouted. They're almost gentle. That's what makes them colder. Inside the trailer, the search begins. Gloves on, camera flashes, every drawer, every box, every stain on the carpet cataloged. It's not big. There's nowhere for anything to really hide. But monsters rarely need much space. On the counter, unpaid bills, an old coffee maker, a chipped mug with a faded sports team logo. In the bedroom, an unmade bed, a duffel bag half packed, a small metal lockbox under a stack of shirts. The lockbox isn't locked. That almost feels like arrogance. Inside it, cash, a few pawn tickets, 2 cheap watches, a handful of motel keycards from different chains, different towns, and jewelry. Not expensive, not curated, not displayed. Just thrown together in a knot of chains and trinkets like someone emptied out a forgotten lost and found and never bothered to sort it. A plastic ring with a pink stone, a thin gold bracelet with a broken clasp, a silver dolphin pendant, small chip on the fin. For a second, nobody moves. The room seems to shrink around that piece of metal lying on black felt. It's not an exact match to the prop the TV show used. It's not the same one they found in the marsh back in '92. It's smaller, the chain thinner, the clasp different. But the shape, that lazy arc of the tail, the tiny etched eye, it's like seeing a twin separated at birth. Dana feels her pulse in her throat. Evidence bag, gloves, photo, label. The movement breaks the spell. They keep going. Under the bed, they find an old cooler. Inside, wrapped in a towel that was once white and is now the color of nicotine, there's a folded piece of fabric. Blue and white, minuscule flowers fading. Not the dress from the marsh. That's in an evidence freezer back in Florida, but startlingly close. A second one. Same brand, same size, same pattern. The tag is cut in a rough line where a name label might have been. The towel smells faintly of mildew and something older. The sheriff curses under his breath. "What the hell is this, a souvenir box?" he mutters. No one answers. The room feels heavy with the weight of things that shouldn't still exist. There's no blood, no obvious scream frozen in cloth, just objects, ordinary on their own, wrong in this context. Back in Cypress Key, the phone rings and rings. Someone saw a headline online, someone's cousin in Texas texted, someone's aunt heard a rumor at the beauty salon. The news travels faster than the official press release. They got him, people say, unsure who him is, but sure what it's supposed to mean. Florida 1992 cold case solved, a network banner proclaims before the sheriff has even stepped in front of a local camera. The question mark is gone now. That detail will sting later. In the Hart house, a neighbor knocks before Linda can find the remote. "Turn on Channel 7, she says, breathless. "You need to see." On the screen, a photo of Ellison from the 90s, blurred slightly as if the past is resisting being dragged forward. The anchor's voice is smooth, solemn. After more than a decade, an arrest has been made in the disappearance of Cypress Key waitress Emily Hart. Authorities say developments in forensic science and a national TV broadcast helped reinvigorate the case. Words tumble. DNA. Florida. Cold case. Solved. Linda stares at the screen like it's an optical illusion. The name means nothing to her. Mark Ellison. Just letters. Her brain tries to attach this stranger's face to every nightmare she's ever had about what happened on that bridge. None of them fit perfectly. How could they? She never had a face in those dreams. Just a presence. A shadow opening the driver's door, leaning in, reaching. A silhouette at the railing. A voice on a payphone, breathing static. Her hands start to shake. Solved, the anchor repeats, smiling that sympathetic newsreader smile. Linda stands up, walks to the TV, switches it off. In Texas, the interrogation room is colder than the trailer, brighter than the morning outside. They flew him back under escort, paperwork rustling around him like ghost wings. He sat between deputies on the plane, expression calm, hands chained loosely, glancing once out the window when they crossed over water. No one said Harbor Bridge, but everyone thought it. Now he sits at a metal table, cuffed to a ring, eyes taking in every angle of the room. Dana sits opposite, a file folder closed in front of her. Beside her, a state attorney from Florida flips through her notes. A camera watches from the corner, red light steady. The recorder on the table ticks digital seconds. They go over the ritual again. Name, date of birth, rights. He waves nothing this time. I want a lawyer, he says quickly, like a man buckling his seatbelt at the first hint of turbulence. He has learned something in the years since 1992. They tell him one is on the way, that in the meantime they're allowed to book him, that some questions are administrative. It's a dance. He knows some of the steps. We have your DNA, Mark, Dana says quietly, more statement than opening shot. In Emily Hart's car. We have it linked to another crime scene. We have witnesses who place you near the diner in the marsh. We have your schedule. We have your motel records. We found items in your trailer. She doesn't say the word trophies. She doesn't have to. He tilts his head like he's listening to a song he doesn't particularly like. You have me working a job, he says. You have me smoking cigarettes, which is not exactly news. You have some woman with a grudge who doesn't like that I used to have bad taste in jewelry. You don't have her. You don't have a body. Without that, you got nothing but stories. The attorney leans forward. We have enough to charge you, she says. Kidnapping. Likely homicide. You can talk to us now, or you can talk later, but this is your chance to explain, to tell us where she is, to tell her family what you did with their daughter. For a heartbeat, something moves behind his eyes. A flicker, not guilt, something more like calculation. He looks at Dana. You really want that? He asks. You really want to know? You think it'll help that woman sleep any better at night? He snorts softly. You cops, always thinking truth fixes something. It doesn't. It just makes new nightmares. The door opens. A public defender walks in. Briefcase scuffed, hair slightly disheveled. Ellison's face shudders. The moment fractures. Counsel sits, whispers, flips through the summary of evidence, the list of charges, the thick stack of pages that carry more weight than the cinder blocks in these walls. The attorney raises her head. My client has no further statements at this time, she says, calm and automatic. The recording stops. The camera keeps rolling because it's always rolling, but the words that matter won't be on tape now. They'll live in looks and pauses, in the air between sentences that never get spoken. Back home, the headline solidifies. Local papers printed in black ink. Florida, 1992, cold case solved. Arrest in Emily Hart disappearance. National outlets pick it up, shave off nuance, compress it further. Arrest made in 13-year-old Florida, cold case. The question mark is gone now. The story is declared finished by people who will never drive across Harbor Bridge at night, who will never see a single white sneaker every time they glance at the shoulder. For the sheriff's office, there is no finish line, just a new phase of the same grim marathon. Extradition, formal charges, arraignment, bail denial, motions, hearings. The word trial floats on the horizon like a mirage. The case file, already thick, grows heavier with every new document, every forensic supplement, every statement. Reporters call daily, hungry for quotes, for a soundbite to hang under their graphics. Can you confirm the case is solved, Sheriff? They ask. He grits his teeth. We've made an arrest, he says. The case is ongoing. In the Hart kitchen, no one uses the word solved. They don't know how. How do you apply that word to a story with no grave, to a girl whose remains have never been found, whose last minutes exist only as speculation and nightmare? Linda meets with the state attorney once, twice, 3 times. She sits in a conference room with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs and learns the language of courtrooms, of burden of proof and reasonable doubt and jury selection. She sees photos of Ellison on the table. She hears them refer to him as the defendant. The word feels too soft in her ears. There is a moment, though, a tiny one, when something like vindication flares and fades. It happens when she's shown the DNA report. She doesn't understand the numbers, the charts, the percentages, but she understands the sentence the attorney points at with a manicured finger. The probability that the DNA profile obtained from item 24, cigarette butt, and item 51, beer can, originates from an individual other than Mark Ellison is less than 1 in several million. She reads it twice. Less than 1, several million. For the first time, the shadow in her imagination has a name that science is willing to stand behind. Outside the courthouse on the day of Ellison's first appearance, cameras cluster behind a roped-off area. People press up against the barriers, phones raised, eyes bright with the mix of curiosity and anger that only crime brings out. When they bring him in, shackles scraping, orange jumpsuits stark against the gray concrete, the crowd murmurs. Some shout, "Monster! Coward! Tell us where she is!" Others just stare, trying to reconcile this ordinary-looking man with the extraordinary weight of the accusations attached to him. He doesn't look at the cameras, he doesn't look at the crowd, he does glance up at the building where the courtroom waits. For all his earlier bravado, there's a flicker of something like surprise that it has come to this. For 13 years, he walked through towns like weather, unremarkable, unremarked upon. Now the lenses drink him in, like he's finally become what he always should have been, visible. Inside, he pleads not guilty. The words land like stones in water. They make ripples. They do not change the depth. A trial is set months down the line. Enough time for motions, enough time for strategy, enough time for doubt to creep back in around the edges of the certainty everyone wants to carry. Because here is the truth beneath the bold-faced headlines and the shouting outside. They still don't know exactly what happened on that bridge in June 1992. They know his DNA was in her car. They know he was near the diner, the marsh, the motel. They know he kept things he had no right to keep. But they don't know if she died in the car, on the bridge, in the marsh, somewhere else entirely. They don't know why. They don't know whether she saw it coming or whether it hit her like a truck in the dark. The law can live with some of those unknowns. Juries have convicted on less. But the story that plays in Linda's head, in the heads of everyone who watched this case age and calcify, needs more. It needs the last chapter, the place, the time, the answering of the one question that no courtroom can fully address. Where is she now? Ellison sits in a jail cell, back against cinder block, knees drawn up, listening to the echo of other men's voices around him. He lights imaginary cigarettes with his fingers, smoke ghosts curling in his mind. He is not a man used to being confined. He is used to highways, cheap motels, stepping over lines and out of frames. Now his world is 8 feet by 10, and the length of a corridor he'll shuffle down in shackles. He knows the game has changed, but he also knows its cracks. No body, no eyewitness. A case older than some of the panel that will one day judge him. He knows how defense attorneys talk about contamination, about degraded samples, about chain of custody in little rural evidence rooms before the word digital meant anything to them. He knows that Florida 1992 cold case solved may look great on a chyron, but inside a courtroom nothing is solved until 12 strangers say so. On some level, he must also know this, that the longer he keeps the last pieces of the story buried, the more power he holds. Not legal power. Emotional, psychological, the power to make a mother wake at 3:11 a.m. every June, listening for a phone that will never ring again. The power to make a bridge feel like a scar every time someone drives across it. The power to keep the word solved from ever really settling over Cypress Key, no matter how many reporters type it. In the sheriff's office, in a room with a board still covered in photos of a teenager in a diner uniform and a bridge under fog, Dana peels off a new headline someone has pinned up in the corner. She looks at it, that bold, triumphant word, and tucks it into a drawer instead. There is work yet to do, witnesses to find, patterns to present, a whole community's grief to try to translate into the language of evidence and exhibits. Outside, the sun sets over the marsh near Mile 8, in the same slow, indifferent way it always has. The water moves, dark and edgeless, hiding its silt, its roots, its possible bones. On Harbor Bridge, a car slows briefly near the spot where a white Honda once idled alone, then accelerates again, its taillights fading into the deepening blue. The world looks, from a distance, as if nothing has changed. Up close, everything has. They call it case prep, like it's paperwork and coffee and calendars, but underneath the polite meetings and printed motions, it's war planning. The state builds its fortress brick by brick. DNA experts, chain of custody testimony, contractor logs, pay stubs, motel registers, the woman with the necklace memory, the victim from the 1990 parking lot attack, if she can be found, if she'll agree to step back into that night. The defense sharpens its knives in the same quiet rooms. Degradation, contamination, mistaken identity, the big empty where a body should be. 2 stories aimed straight at 12 strangers who haven't even been picked yet. In a corner office with bad carpet and a view of the courthouse steps, the state attorney spreads the evidence out on a conference table. Photos, reports, a map of Cypress Key with pins in the diner, the bridge, the marsh, the motel. Another map, broader, showing the city from the 1990 assault. Another, broader still, little dots tracing Ellison's movements across years of roadwork. Here he poured asphalt, here he vanished. Here a woman was followed in a parking lot. Here a girl disappeared from a bridge. The lines between those dots are drawn in pencil. They need to be drawn in ink. We have enough to charge, the attorney says, mostly to reassure herself. We have enough to try. The question is, do we have enough to win? It's not a question she can answer alone. It lives in the heads of 12 people she hasn't met and in the hands of a man sitting in a cinder block cell who still hasn't said the one thing that would blow this all open. Yes, I did it, and here is where she is. Dana sits across from her, arms folded, eyes on the photos. She's not thinking about win or lose yet. She's thinking about Linda Hart sitting at home, about 11 seconds of static at 3:11 a.m., about a white sneaker on gray concrete, about a dolphin pendant in a lockbox. He's never going to tell us, she says softly. Not because he's protecting himself, because he likes that we don't know. It's the last thing he can still control. The attorney nods. Then we take away everything else he can control, she answers. We give the jury a pattern they can't ignore. We give them science that sounds like scripture. We give them a man whose life lines up with every bad night this county has had for 30 years, and we hope. Hope is not an admissible exhibit, but it sits there anyway, invisible, heavy. They find the woman from 1990. It takes months of calls, old addresses, dead phone numbers, stale leads. When they finally sit down with her in a small apartment 3 states away, she is older, tired, eyes wary in a way that doesn't come from age alone. Her name is Angela. She listens to the pitch, the reopening, the DNA, the pattern, with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea like it's the only warm thing in the room. I told them back then, she says, voice flat. I told them he smelled like asphalt and smoke, that he kept talking about highways, that he said nobody pays attention to girls in cars. She looks at a photo of Ellison in his 30s, the contractor ID shot. Her mouth tightens. He's put on weight, she says, but that's him. They ask if she will testify, if she will stand up in a courtroom and relive the night a stranger yanked open her car door, climbed inside without asking, turned her own seat into a trap. She stares at the wall for a long time. When she speaks, her voice is almost a whisper. I thought moving away would bury it, she says. I thought not saying his name out loud would make him fade. It didn't. It just made me carry it alone. She looks at them finally. If he did that to that girl on the bridge, then he kept walking while we stayed stuck. I'll testify. There will be motions to keep her off the stand. The defense will say her case is too old, too prejudicial, too separate. They'll say it will bias the jury, poison the well, turn this into a trial about character instead of facts. They'll be right, in a way. But the state will argue pattern. Modus operandi, a man who uses cars like hunting blinds. A man who lights cigarettes in other people's spaces and leaves their ash behind. Back in Cypress Key, the town keeps breathing around the growing storm. Preparations for the trial seep into everyday conversation like humidity. At the Bayside Diner, customers lower their voices when they talk about witness lists. At the grocery store, people speculate in the freezer aisle about jury duty, about whether they could sit in judgment, about whether they'd want to. Some say they'd throw the book at him based on the headlines alone. Others say, cautious, that 13 years is a long time and memories are tricky and maybe it's better to leave ghosts alone. No one actually believes that last part. Miguel Santos appears in town again for the first time in over a decade. He doesn't want to. He's subpoenaed. His testimony is part of the state's story, whether he likes it or not, because the way the investigation bent around him matters now. The defense will use it to show sloppy work back then. The state will use it to show how far they've come, how much care is being taken now. Miguel is a symbol to both sides. To himself, he's a man who once almost lost his life to a narrative that didn't fit. He sits in the same chair he did years ago, different paint on the walls, newer camera in the corner. His hair is flecked with gray now, his eyes are harder. I told them I didn't do anything, he says to Dana in a pre-trial interview. Over and over. Didn't matter. I was the convenient story. Now you got a different story, so I'm supposed to help you tell it. He laughs, bitter. Funny how that works. I'm not asking you to help us, Dana answers. I'm asking you to help her. She doesn't say Emily's name often, not in rooms like this. It feels like putting her on the stand too. But here, with him, she does. He swallows, looks at the table. You really think this guy did it? He asks. I think he was there, she says. I think he lied. I think his DNA is in her car and on another woman's pain. I think he carries little pieces of people he shouldn't carry. She doesn't say what she really thinks, that men like Ellison find towns like Cypress Key because they're easy to pass through and easy to scar, that if someone had listened differently in 1990, maybe there wouldn't have been a 1992. In court, Miguel will tell a jury what it's like to be the wrong man in the wrong place. He will talk about interviews that felt like accusations, about being half convicted by gossip before he even saw a judge, about leaving town because every set of eyes said monster, even when the law finally said not guilty of anything at all. His story won't be the main one. It will be a current under the surface, a reminder that cold case solved headlines are built on foundations that can crack. Jury selection takes days. They call in hundreds. Some are dismissed immediately. Too close to the case, too vocal about their opinions, too eager to be on TV. Others try to get out of it, citing jobs, kids, illness, anything. The ones who remain sit in that high-ceilinged room and answer questions about what they watch, what they read, whether they remember a certain missing girl from 1992, whether they saw a certain cable TV reenactment episode late one night and thought, my God. They say yes or no, but their eyes do more talking than their mouths. On the morning the trial finally begins, Cypress Key wakes up early. It feels like a hurricane day without the wind. Air thick. Streets quieter than they should be. In the Hart House, Linda puts on a dress she hasn't worn in years. It hangs looser now. Grief has a way of carving people down. She pins a small photo of Emily behind the visor of her car before she pulls away like a saint's card on a dashboard. In the frame, her daughter will always be 19, always mid-laugh, always unaware that this image will be the one strangers see when they hear her name. The courtroom fills, but not with everyone who wants a seat. There are limits, numbers, fire codes. People line up outside, some holding homemade signs with Emily's name, others just hoping to catch a glimpse of something that will later become a story for their friends. I was there, you know. I saw him, I saw the detective, I saw her mother. Reporters set up live shots on the lawn, microphones, logos. The words cold case and solved appear in graphics on screens tucked into living rooms, bars, hospital waiting rooms. Inside it's cooler, wood-polished, flags in their stands. The hum of pre-trial chatter dies slowly as the bailiff calls the room to order. The jury files in, faces carefully neutral, suddenly aware of how heavy their silence has become. The judge takes the bench. The defendant's chair scrapes softly as Ellison is led to it. Shackles off now, suit on, hair tamed. Without the orange jumpsuit, he looks smaller, less monstrous, more like the kind of man you'd forget sitting 3 stools down at a bar. That, everyone in the room understands on some level, is the point. The state goes first. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the attorney begins, voice steady, clear. She paints a picture in broad strokes. A young woman leaving work, a car found on a bridge, a dress in a marsh, a town that never forgot. She brings in the science, but she doesn't drown them in it. She talks about cigarettes and beer cans and the way molecules cling to objects longer than guilt clings to memory. She points, not literally, not yet, toward the man at the defense table as she speaks of a pattern of movement, of harm, of trophies. We may not be able to show you a body, she says, because he took that from us, but we can show you the trail he left behind, the one he thought time would erase. The defense rises, smooth as oil. Their story is simpler, old evidence, fallible science, a man who worked a job and smoked a lot and now finds his past held against him by people under pressure to close a file that has haunted their town. They lean on the missing body like it's a crutch. The state wants you to fill in the gaps with fear, they tell the jury. They want you to convict not because of what they can prove happened, but because of what you imagine happened on that bridge. In America, we do not put people in prison for decades based on imagination. Witnesses come and go. Walter Briggs, older now, stands and tells them about that night on the bridge, about the headlights and the open door and the empty driver's seat. His voice trembles once and then steadies. Linda takes the stand and the room holds its breath. She talks about her daughter as a person, not a victim, and somewhere between the birthdays and the eye rolls and the way she took her coffee, she has to say the words she hates most. I never saw her again. The jurors watch her with expressions they try to keep blank. Some fail. You can't train your eyes not to soften when you see that kind of loss. Angela testifies, voice shaking but clear, about a parking lot, a man's weight in her car, the reek of smoke and hot asphalt. The judge instructs the jury carefully, tells them this is limited purpose testimony, sets legal fences around their emotions. But fences are suggestions when fear gets involved. Miguel tells them what it was like to be the wrong suspect. The defense emphasizes his story, uses it to paint doubt across every decision the sheriff's office ever made. The state leans right back into it, using Miguel as a cautionary tale about why they waited until DNA and documentation lined up before touching Ellison. Experts click through slides of peaks and valleys, markers and alleles. Defense experts counter with their own graphs, their own warnings about contamination, about the way old evidence can be mishandled. The jury's eyes glaze at times, but they're taking notes, even if those notes are just words like cigarette, beer can, same guy. The dolphin pendant is passed around in a plastic box, glinting under the fluorescent lights. The blue and white dress from the cooler, carefully preserved, folded, laid out in a photograph because the real thing is too fragile to travel. Ellison watches it all with an expression that hovers between boredom and disdain. He leans toward his lawyer to whisper occasionally, but mostly he just sits. When witnesses mention his name, he doesn't flinch. When Angela points at him and says, "That's him," his eyes slide away. Not in shame, but in something colder. Maybe annoyance, maybe calculation. When Linda looks at him from the stand, he looks back just once, and something like a smirk tugs at one corner of his mouth. It is so quick that only a few people see it. For them, the trial is over in that instant. For the law, it's just another unrecorded moment. Outside of court hours, the town lives on in suspended animation. At night, after the day's testimony, bar TVs replay clips, radio hosts dissect sound bites, social media buzzes in a low, constant hum. Some people line up facts and decide he's guilty. Others dwell on the missing body and decide they can't be sure. The jurors, sequestered or instructed not to talk, carry the weight of all this psychic noise without being able to release it. They go back to hotel rooms and stare at bland artwork on the walls, at silent TVs, at the reflection of their own faces in bathroom mirrors, and know that whatever they decide will be stamped in ink forever. Linda goes home each night to a house that feels like a museum. The extra plate at the table has been put away for the duration of the trial. It felt like tempting fate. The box under her bed has gained one new item, a copy of the indictment with Ellison's name at the top and her daughter's in the middle. She doesn't read it often. She doesn't need to. The words are etched into her already. For Dana, the trial is a blur of long days, short nights, whispered strategy sessions in hallways, endless cups of coffee gone cold on courthouse benches. But even in the blur, certain moments burn bright. The way the jury leaned forward when the scientist from the state lab explained the improbability of another man having that exact DNA profile. The way one juror scribbled furiously when Angela described the smell of his breath, the words he used. The way the defense attorney's voice tightened when they had to address the items in the lockbox, the jewelry with no clear origin. She knows the case isn't perfect. She knows where the gaps are, where the defense will hammer in its closing. No body, no direct witness, no confession. But she also knows, with the bone-deep certainty that has been driving her since she pulled that old evidence box off a shelf, that if this man walks out of this courthouse free, the word solved will never mean anything in Cypress Key again. And somewhere beyond all these rooms and cameras and arguments, the bridge stands over dark water. The marsh holds its secrets. The night of June 1992 loops like a tape that never quite reaches its end. The trial can write a verdict. The headlines can call the case closed. But unless someone points to a spot, here, under this root, beneath this silt, in this unmarked stretch of woods, and says she is here, there will always be a part of this story that refuses to lie down.